If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
What's the spookiest, most terrifying sighting of a paranormal or strange being that you've experienced in the dead of night, that still frightens you to this day?
The Vanishing hitchhiker. This incident happened with me in 2013, which left me terrified for weeks. It was in mid-May. I and my cousin were driving back. It was late in the night, so the traffic was light, and as we were heading back from a party, our moods were very light and chirpy. So it was around 11:30 p.m. As we were crossing the area, my brother saw a lady asking for a lift, and the face felt familiar to him. We stopped, and he remembered that she was his batchmate from medical school. My brother got out of the car, and she came running to us. She immediately recognized my brother, and as she was someone familiar to him, he decided to give her the lift. We continued driving while my brother and his batchmate caught up with each other. The weird thing was she was not telling much about herself but knew everything about my brother, what he was doing and where he was. I was bored, as most of their conversation involved things that did not interest me, so I did not even look at her or my brother after exchanging initial pleasantries. Almost after half an hour, we reached the place where she wanted to go. It was all deserted as it was midnight already. My brother and I were fully focused on the route, and we could hear her telling us directions, and then she suddenly screamed, yes, she shouted, to stop. My brother immediately pressed the brake, thinking something was wrong. He looked back to inquire, and there was no one. He switched on the lights and started checking the back seat. Windows and doors were shut, there was absolutely no one. The girl and her bag were all missing. We both got out of the car, and the place we were in was a crematorium. We were terrified that for a few minutes we could not understand what just happened. After that, how we got out of the area and reached home was all history. The next day, my brother investigated about this batchmate, and he got to know that she committed suicide a year back, and she lived in the area, and her body was cremated in that crematorium where she took us. When he told me about this, we couldn't sleep for days. It was surreal. The woman at the well, true story. The following story was told to me by my uncle when I was visiting him back in my homeland, Malaysia. Just some background, my uncle was living with his parents at the time, and they are still living in the house that I will be talking about in this story. The truth behind this story was verified by his parents and friends of my uncle that I have met later down the years. So, here's how it goes. My uncle's house lies on a street that is right next to a dense forest area. When he was a kid, the women living in his area used to bathe using water from a well that used to be near the forest. Every afternoon he would hear the women chatting and laughing as they had their baths. There would also be a strong smell of shampoo in the air whenever the women were using the well. As time passed, the women living in his area stopped using the well as technology progressed, I guess, and more people in the area were able to afford to equip showers in their houses. In his college years, a woman in the area committed suicide by drowning herself in the well. This is when the strange events started happening. My uncle usually stayed back at college every day to study after his classes, meaning he would usually get home during the late hours of the night, usually around midnight. I should mention that my uncle had a very passive dog at the time, which rarely barked or made any noise. Ever since the suicide, his dog would start howling frantically late at night, usually around the time that he would get home. His dog would continue howling for hours on end. But this was not all. Every night around midnight, he would be able to hear sounds of water splashing coming from the forest, accompanied by what sounded like a woman singing. There would also be a strong smell of shampoo in the air. Everyone in the area noticed this, and it was confirmed that no one from any of the houses had been using the well, because, well, we are in the 21st century. This phenomenon occurred every single night. Every night when my uncle got home from college, he would see his dog howling frantically and hear the water splashing and singing and smell the shampoo in the air. According to his parents, these events still take place but not every single night anymore. I didn't stay overnight, so I didn't see this myself, but take from it what you will. Montro Cemetery. My friends and I used to have a paranormal research group. We had heard stories of an old abandoned graveyard. It was on a hill overlooking the PD River in Mechanicsville, South Carolina. It had been owned by a church that later burned down and was relocated. Most of the graves had sunken, and the tombstones had either broken or completely disappeared. They placed a huge group marker with the names of the known burials on it. The story said that it was haunted by the spirit of a young child in antebellum clothes and a black shadow with red eyes, tied to a story about a man who brought his victims to the graveyard because it was so remote to kill them. We were excited to be there. When we arrived, the first thing we noticed was that it was pitch black there. It was so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. My friend's girlfriend refused to leave the car. It was because the graveyard was so overgrown with forest that it blocked all star and moonlight. Our flashlights didn't even make a dent. It was a hot, muggy night, but when you entered the graveyard, the whole thing was in a massive cold spot. My friend and I got goosebumps from the cold and fear. The temp was 85 degrees, but inside our thermometers read 62. There was a feeling of dread around the place, like something there didn't want us there. My friend said he could feel the place's anger. An anger that makes sense when you consider all the vandalism. Then when our group entered, the air felt thick, like it was resisting you and pushing you back. It was harder and harder to walk the further you went in. Someone compared it to walking on marshmallows too, as the ground seemed to grip our feet as we tried to proceed. Finally, we heard a sound resembling something rushing toward us, and we saw what appeared to be a black shadow with red eyes moving in our direction. We all froze up at first. Then as the shadow seemed to grow in size, radiating a dark anger, we ran out of there. Then it was like the trees themselves were against us, as it felt like they closed in and gripped at our clothes, holding on as we tried to leave. We finally made it out, and when we went to leave, one of the car's batteries was dead, though it was only months old, like something had drained it. We called a local tow truck, but the driver refused to go until morning because he said it was evil and haunted at night. We got pictures with so many orbs and shadows. One picture even showed moss that looked like a man's shape hanging from a tree. We also got EVPs full of what sounded like angry whispers. It was the scariest paranormal investigation I had ever been on. We never did go back. Something was at my door at midnight. On a chilly night around 11:50 p.m., my sister was peacefully occupying the living room, which serves as our house's entrance. She started hearing 3 faint soft knocks on the door while our small dog was barking at the covered window while also taking a sniff underneath the door. She told my mom about it and asked me to come with her outside. After going outside and searching around our area, there was nothing to be seen. My mom believes that the entities she refers to inhabit the trees near our house, especially the large mango trees. As Filipinos, we have profound beliefs about paranormal creatures, and this wasn't our first incident with them. Almost every night around or past midnight, our dog seems to always be barking at the door or the window. Additionally, a large Nara tree was present in the lot long before our house was built, and we have been residing in the same location for over 55 years. Okay, for starters, I did not believe any of this was real until after midnight last night. I believed everyone was just making things up and having communities like this to be a part of for shits and giggles. However, last night I saw something I could not and still cannot explain. I live in Noonan, Georgia. My house is very rural and surrounded by woods on all sides and all farms on my side of town. I did not know much about flesh pedestrians other than the mainstream stuff going around. Did not believe it was real. Messed with my girlfriend about it all the time to scare her as a joke. Frequently mentioned their actual name. However, I got back to my house around 2 a.m. last night. I was on FaceTime with my girlfriend while I was driving home. However, upon arriving, and at around 80% battery, I might add, my phone shut off and would not work. I didn't think anything of it. However, I got out of my truck, and my dogs started going crazy. Barking and growling loud. They only bark at people they don't know, as they are livestock guardians and don't pay animals they don't see as threats any mind. Anyways, while they are barking, I hear what sounds like fake barking close behind me. Almost like a person trying to sound like a dog barking, but if that person had never tried and was just shitty at it. It made my hair stand up because I had assumed it was a person in the woods behind me. I turned towards the sound and saw nothing. The sound happened again, and when I looked in the direction, I saw a creature I'll never forget. It was hunched on all fours. Gray, humanish face. Large dark black eyes that reflected brightly when the light was shone on them. No mouth. Human-like body, but with patches of fur throughout. Fur not covering body. I do not know any more details because as soon as I looked it in the eyes, it bolted towards me. I jumped in my truck and bolted. No more chasing. I called my grandmother, who lives through the woods, to give me an extra set of eyes, so I know I am not crazy. She, who has always been adamant that nothing exists paranormally, said she had been worked up by my dogs barking through the woods and a very high-pitched scream that sounded human and animal-like. We sat in the driveway and half-heartedly looked through the woods in the direction of the sighting. We began to hear a grunting in a different point in the woods. Loud grunting, kind of like a deer in rut. We turned to listen, and then it started behind us. Then, the scream she had heard before was changing directions around us when we would turn to hear it every time. Could not sleep after going inside. Locked all windows and doors. Heard a tapping and knocking on my bedroom for about an hour. After falling asleep, I had reoccurring nightmares of that being watching me and hunting me from different places. Please help me identify. Sounds like a Navajo skinwalker, but I live nowhere near their land, nor do I know any Navajo. I myself am part Cherokee and Creek, but only about 15%. Not native ritual land that I am on, that I know of. Please help. I have never been skittish. My girlfriend routinely has to tell me not to go look in the woods by myself after hearing sounds. But after these sounds and what I saw, I will no longer be going outside at night. My friend and I saw some unnatural creature on my college campus in the middle of the night. This happened during my freshman year of college, almost exactly 4 years ago. My friend Haley and I used to smoke together at night after a long day of studying. We had a beautiful campus, so we'd always just roam around and chat while we smoked. Our friends found this little abandoned shack thing that we used to call half a house on our campus. It apparently used to be part of a building, and this one specific room was never fully torn down, so it only had 3 standing walls. The walls were made of wood, and since it was so old, some of the wooden slats had fallen out, leaving gaps in the walls. We met around midnight and decided to go over to the half a house, where we had been many times before, to go smoke. We were hanging out there for about 10 minutes or so when we started to hear rustling in the leaves coming from the opposite side of the wall. It sounded like it was maybe 10 yards away from us. We thought somebody was coming and didn't want to be found smoking, so we hushed our voices and listened to the sound of someone walking around back there. The rustling stopped, but then we heard it jumping, and we could tell it was coming closer and closer to us. It was still on the other side of the wall, so we couldn't see what it was at first. But then we saw this thing push itself through one of the missing slats and toward us. The only lighting we had at the time was the moon, which backlit the creature, so we couldn't make out its features. Just its overall shape and size. It stood approximately 1.5 feet tall, about 0.5 meters, and had a completely human-like shape, although it was extremely thin. It had a head perhaps the size of a baseball, a neck, and 2 arms that it used to push itself through the hole in the wall and toward us. Its upper arms looked to be maybe the circumference of my wrist. Based on the shape of its upper body, it very clearly was not a raccoon or even a cat or dog. It was something unnatural. The second we saw that thing coming toward us, Haley and I ran away from it and back to her dorm room as fast as we possibly could. We still have absolutely no explanation for it. I was hanging out with her just this past weekend, and when I brought up the incident, she said, either it was a person who was messing with us, or we saw something supernatural that night. I find it difficult to believe that it was human, as even individuals of shorter stature do not typically measure only 18 inches in height, nor do they possess such a slender build. Furthermore, one must consider what motive a person would have to be jumping around in a secluded area at night. Although it was not exactly a wooded area, this section of the campus did have trees. Some demon in the mirror. This took place a couple days ago. So, it was late at midnight, 12 a.m. I was deciding whether or not to go to bed, but I went to bed because I was tired. I couldn't sleep, and I just felt this really weird tingling in my fingers. I was also sweating. I decided to wait a couple minutes. It's probably a headache. I waited an hour and 32 minutes. It was then 1:32 a.m. I still couldn't sleep, so I decided to get some water. When I went to get water, I looked at the mirror in the living room. Okay, first let me explain. The bedroom was next to my living room, and there's a mirror on the wall of my living room. The bathroom is right across from the bedroom. So anyways, I went to get water, but I looked in the mirror and paused. I saw some weird looking thing. I was walking normally, but I saw its feet, and it was like it was on tippy toes. It had red eyes, and it was in the same position I was. I rushed to the bathroom to get water. Then I put the water on the bathroom counter to see that thing again. Man, I was ready to tackle whatever the hell that thing was. I didn't even look, I just put my shoulder up front and charged at the mirror. I then hit my face on the mirror because it was gone and got a nosebleed. I fell unconscious after it ended. I woke up the next day and decided to text all my friends and my parents. I still don't know what happened and what it was to this day. I was backpacking with my dog about 12 miles from the road and trailhead, so we were far from people, but it was a popular area, and we saw no one all day. At about 2 a.m. my dog started this really low, deep growl and woke me up. I turn on my headlamp and see his teeth showing, and he's right on top of me. I hear heavy footsteps, black bear/moose? Near the tent. I leash my dog so he doesn't tear through the tent, and the footsteps move further away but keep circling my tent. All of my food and toiletries are hung in a tree in a bear bag, nothing in the tent to draw a bear's attention. I clap my hands, something is still slowly circling, not something a moose would do, and a bear might if he wanted food, but I've got nothing and a really big dog with me. I decide to step out of the tent with the leash in one hand and bear spray in the other, yelling, "Hey bear!" The footsteps stop, the dog's nose is in the air, telling me to look right, but there is nothing in my headlamp that I can see. Didn't hear anything run off, but it's quiet. I give it 5 minutes or so, get back in the tent, and it starts up again, slowly circling maybe 50 feet from me. Maybe an hour later, I hear the footsteps wander off into the woods. At dawn, I take the dog and the bear spray and start looking for tracks. I find a clear path in the leaves that had been trampled, but no tracks. The dog's nose is on the ground, and I follow his lead, and he follows the loop around our campsite. We finally see a few human footprints, not shoe tracks, a regular size, not Bigfoot, bare human foot. Plus, yup, a human turd and toilet paper. Some hole was wandering around the middle of nowhere, near the tent, and circling my tent for an hour or more, and left a dump for me to find. Small hairy man has visited my mom twice since she was pregnant. I have always been interested in paranormal stuff because I am curious about people's experiences, not because I truly believe in the paranormal, but because I have to take this thing into consideration because 2 more people saw it besides my mom. The first time was 22 years ago, when my mom was pregnant with my sister. She had a fight with my dad, and it was so bad she had to leave the house and slept at an old lady's house around the corner. She was 7 to 8 months pregnant, so the old lady, fearing my mom could go into labor because of the stress, stayed with her in the same room at the back of the house. They say it was around midnight, and they were about to fall asleep when they saw a shadow looking through the window. They stayed still until they heard the person walking away. My mom says she thought it was my dad looking for her, so they went to see through the window to make sure. They both say they saw a small man, covered in black hair with a small tail, walking away. Now, they thought it was a monkey, even though there isn't even a zoo in that city, much less monkeys, but that was the logical explanation, until they saw it turned around. They describe it as having a completely human-like face, like being a man, the only difference being its size, like a 5-year-old kid, but chubby and covered in hair. It stood there looking at them for maybe 5 seconds and then ran away. The next encounter happened 4 to 5 months after, at my grandma's house, where my parents lived. They had built a room behind the main house. My sister was sleeping in her crib in my parents' room, and I was with my grandma and aunt in the main house. My aunt says my mom came to see if I needed something. I was 2 years/0, and asked my aunt to keep an eye on me because she was going to take a nap. My aunt said sure, and my mom left. My aunt says maybe 2 minutes had passed when she clearly heard the sounds of coins coming from my parents' room. I should say my sister had a sweater with tiny coins attached to it, so my aunt thought my sister was awake and went to grab her so my mom could sleep. She says she was walking to the room and saw the door wide open. When she came closer, she saw my mom lying in bed completely asleep, and next to my sister's crib was the same human-like thing trying to grab my sister. She screamed at my mom, and the being ran away to the backyard. She picked up my sister and said my mom was still sleeping. She had to push her for her to wake up. My mom did not tell anyone about her encounter because she thought that night she and the old lady were just tired and they saw that thing under the moonlight, not the best illumination. Yet, my aunt described this thing exactly as my mom did, small, chubby, and covered in hair, standing on 2 legs, and with a man's face. I forgot to add my dad and 2 other neighbors ran after that thing, heard it running through some bushes behind the yard, but didn't find it. Family real ghost stories. To clarify, this all took place from the 2000s to the 1990s, I believe, and I didn't experience it firsthand. I think this first story was in the Catskills. My dad recently just bought a house near his so that my grandparents could move in so we could be closer to them. They live in the UK. He wanted to get the house set up and, I believe, move some furniture in, overall just fix things up. So he stayed a few nights there. He told me that he could barely get any sleep and felt like he was being watched constantly and had to keep the light in his room on. He then placed salt or holy water around the house, and he said that it made whatever thing stay in the attic. He said he could sometimes see, like, the reflection/glare of a cat's eye in the attics, if you know what I mean. At some point he went into the backyard and into the barn and found 2 gargoyles in the barn and some weird, like, witch's circle? He talked to the neighbors, and they said 2 people used to live there, and they were pretty weird. He then smashed up the gargoyles and the witch circle, went to the church and got a big bottle of holy water. He poured gas on the remains and lit it on fire, then poured the holy water on what remained. He said nothing else weird happened afterwards. My mom and her first husband went to stay in a villa in rural Greece. She said that she heard doors opening at night, knocking, etc., and things being misplaced. She went up to the roof one day and found a dead cat wrapped in cloth. When she flew back home, Her kids started to have nightmares, and strange things began to happen, so she thinks whatever was in Greece followed them back. She managed to get rid of it by getting a priest to come to the house and do something. I don't really remember. Sorry for being vague, I don't remember that much, since I was told this a year or two ago. What do you think happened here? A black dog at midnight. Tonight I had what I believe to be an encounter with a black dog. My boyfriend and I went to see a movie. We saw Brightburn. It was pretty good, and on the way home we decided to stop by a little Fred Meyer near where we live. We parked, and as we were walking in, I turned and looked inside a car. Usually when my boyfriend or I see a dog, we say doggy. So seeing what I thought was a big dog in the car, I said doggy and pointed to the car. It looked like a German Shepherd but much bigger and with big ears pointing up. It didn't move at all as we walked past the car except for its head, which tracked us until we were out of sight in the store. I joked to my boyfriend about how creepy that dog was and how if it wasn't there when we got out, I'd die. We buy our Snapple and head back outside. I look at the car, and the dog is nowhere to be seen. My boyfriend, who's closer, sees the dog is just lying down in the car. While I was laughing about it, I felt on edge, like something wasn't quite right. And I hurriedly got in our car. I tell my boyfriend I'm on edge and joke that it better not watch us as we drive off. As we drive off, to our surprise, the dog is staring directly at our car. So if I die, it's because I saw a black dog. Why I hate 3 a.m. here is just one of my many personal experiences. It was any normal night for me. I was up till 1 a.m. playing League of Legends with a friend when I finally decided I had played enough and went to bed. I knocked out as soon as my head hit the pillow. Next thing I know, I'm wide awake. I look at my alarm clock, and it says it's 3:15. I'm thirsty, but I really don't want to get up, so I roll over to try and get back to sleep, but my throat is just bothering me. I roll over to look back at my clock, and it's 3:20. I say screw it, roll out of bed, and head over to my fridge. I have a glass of milk and start walking back to my room when I turn around and go back for another cup. Great, my thirst is gone, but now I need to go to the bathroom. I urinate, and as I go to wash my hands, I look up into the window right in front of me, and I see a bald man in his 50s just kind of stick his face right up to the glass. He had a 5 o'clock shadow going on. I jump backwards and just stare at the window as he draws his head back. Yeah, it could have been some random guy looking to break into my house. My bathroom window is 8 feet off the ground. There are stairs beneath that window, and I heard no footsteps leaving or any sound in general of someone outside. All of the hairs on my body stuck up on end, and, pardon my French, but I said, duck that, and went right back to bed. This happened recently. It was last year around October during the Hunter moon. It means that during this time, the moon will be very close to Earth and will be the brightest at night. During this time, I was heavily into spiritualism and dabbling with the paranormal, if you will. So I thought it would be great to connect with the other side that night, as the spiritual veil is more open. I believe this was around midnight to 1 a.m., and I decided to walk outside my backyard to see the moon. I was very fascinated by how bright it was and was hesitating about whether I wanted to conduct a spirit session. While I was standing outside in the dark with just the bright moon illuminating over me, I looked beyond my yard towards some houses in the back. My eyes caught something on the roof of one of the houses. This creature looked almost human-like. It crawled on all fours, climbing over the roof. The body was the size of a full adult. There were no distinguishing features, as the creature was all black. The best I can describe this creature is that it is similar to a cryptid or some type of nightcrawler. As I'm standing there, now trying to figure out what I just saw, I get an eerie and dark feeling someone was watching me. I slowly went back inside the house and called it a night. Fast forward a few weeks or so, my family started witnessing a dark shadow. I happened to witness it myself, so I decided to take a break from dabbling with the paranormal. Not sure if what I saw correlated to what I was doing, but this experience still creeps me out. A disturbingly creepy story my stepmother told me. My stepmother has told me many stories that she claimed to be true, but there is one story that was particularly disturbing. This story is the only one that involves something paranormal, unlike the others, which involve real dangers. My stepmother used to live in a house slightly isolated from the rest of the neighborhood. It was wintertime, and she was home alone. During the day, nothing unusual occurred, and around midnight, she retired to sleep. She awoke in the middle of the night. It must have been about 3 a.m., but she felt a bit weird. She wasn't fully awake, and despite not being under the influence of drugs, she felt a bit high. It's a bit hard to explain, but I'll try. You know when you just wake up and you feel really groggy, sleepy, and disoriented? That's pretty much what she described, Except she felt like that during the entire incident. Continuing with the story, she looked to the right side of her bed and saw two weird things standing there. Due to her sleepy state, she took a moment to figure out what was happening. After analyzing the things beside her bed for a while, she described them as two really tall and skinny white humanoids observing her while she slept. They stood there practically motionless, observing her until she eventually fell asleep. I don't remember if she described what their faces looked like, so I'll probably ask in a couple of days if it helps identify what these things were. When I heard this story for the first time, I was almost sure she just had a nightmare. I asked her, and she was certain it wasn't, which raises the question as to what happened that night. Whatever it was, it sounded like our mom's. But it wasn't. When I was 9, my family and I lived in a remote, forested military area. I can't disclose too much for privacy, but let's just say that spotting elephants, deer, and the occasional predator was a normal part of life there. One night, our parents had to attend a formal event, which prohibited children from attending. So it was just me and my friend, let's call him Carl, both 9 years old, and our younger brothers, Sam and Duke, around 5, all made up names. We stayed at my place and decided to watch Shrek. It was late at night, pitch dark outside because of the forest, and eerily quiet. Suddenly, the lights went out for a few minutes, then came back on. We were standing near the window when I heard Carl's mom calling out my nickname from outside. We lived on the second floor. It was a strange, raspy voice. It was an unusual voice, and what made it creepier was that hardly anyone knew that nickname. It wasn't something the neighbors would know. Cindy E. Tilda? Cindy? I asked Carl if he heard it too. He looked freaked out and said, "No. But I heard your mom calling my name." Carl? Carol Tilda? We both froze. There was no way our moms were anywhere nearby. They were at the party, miles away, and we were alone in the house. The younger kids, Sam and Duke, said they heard the voices too, but being 9 years old, we assumed they were just copying us or mishearing things, as they were just around 5 years old. Still, we were all terrified. We tried to distract ourselves with the movie and waited for our parents to come home. When they finally did, we told them, but of course, they didn't believe us. They brushed it off as imagination or a dream. We all eventually moved on. Fast forward almost 9 years later. Carl and I met again and were reminiscing. I brought up that night, and to my shock, he remembered everything clearly. His brother Duke did too. Although my brother Sam's memory was limited, it was sufficient to confirm that we hadn't imagined it. I still don't know what we heard or why. But it wasn't normal. It wasn't just a prank or a dream. We heard each other's moms calling us in eerie voices. When they were nowhere near us. To this day, I can't explain it. Children laughing in a cemetery? When I was about 14 to 15, I went through the inevitable goth phase. So it was normal for my friends and I to be running around in a cemetery around 10 at night, around that time. Nothing strange ever happened except one night. It was 5 of us. We were in a cemetery outside of Arkansas City, Kansas. It didn't have normal headstones. They were all flat on the ground except for a couple big statues of angels, a cross, and some other statues. We were taking pictures by a large cross when we all heard the sound of little kids laughing and playing. We stopped and looked in the direction it was coming from. I and one other got excited and wanted to go investigate. The other 3 went back to the car because they were freaked. My friend and I walked towards the sound. There is a circle drive type road that goes in a loop around the cemetery. As soon as we got close to that road, all the laughing sounds stopped. Still being interested, we crossed the road and looked around. Where we were standing just happened to be the area that was blocked off for children. It had a hanging sign that said Garden of Little Angels. All the headstones were for kids who had died very early. Days to only a few years old. To this day it's the only paranormal/unusual experience I have ever had. For those interested, the cemetery's name is Memorial Lawn Cemetery. When I was a kid, I stayed the night at a friend's house. I'd been there many times before, but I had never stayed the night there. His mom was a heavy smoker, and his dad drank a lot of beer. Besides that, they were the perfect family. So my buddies and I stayed up late eating junk food, drinking soda, and playing N64. Around 2 a.m. we all decided to go to sleep. I woke up to the sound of a crash. Like someone had knocked over the good china. I tried to wake up my friends, but they wouldn't move. So I crept up the stairs alone in the dark. When I got to the top step, I saw something had tipped over onto the dining room table. As I got closer, I could barely make out 2 figures. One was my friend's dad, his head trapped between what had fallen and the table. The other was just a shadow. Its head twisted in my direction and screeched. I just stood there, terrified. The walls began to tremble, almost as if they were responding to a scream. Finally I screamed, "Go away." I felt something shove me backwards, and I flew through walls and the ground until I hit the floor of the basement. I didn't know what happened. I figured it was a bad dream and fell asleep again. When I awoke the next morning, I was really itchy. Although it was summer and therefore hot, I felt strangely isolated from my friends. I got out of my sleeping bag and looked around. Nothing looked the same. I yelled for my friends and the adults but got no response. I walked around crying for what felt like hours until I started to hear voices underneath me. I heard them calling my name. I couldn't tell who it was at the time, so I was silent. After a few minutes, I heard my mom's voice. She was praying for me to come home. I heard her crying, and I called out to her. She stopped so abruptly I almost didn't notice until she started screaming for my dad. After a few minutes of me crying and her consoling me, they found me in the attic. From what I could gather, I had apparently disappeared from my friend's house in the middle of the night 4 days prior. They thought I had been kidnapped, as my friends' families checked out. Police had been looking for me, and family, friends, and almost the whole town were all the while I was in the attic. So everyone understands, there was not an entryway to the attic in the house. If you wanted to get in there, you had to go through a window on the side of the house. You would need a 20-foot ladder, plus power tools. But I was around 10. The only other way was to break through the ceiling inside the house. I was taken to the hospital, where I was interviewed by police and psychiatrists, but none of them could explain what happened. Had 5 long scratches down my back, all parallel and the same length and width, marks along my arms and legs, and the white of one of my eyes was red for a month. My eyes are normally blue, but one was red and blue. I didn't show signs of torture or psychological distress. It was like I teleported there. I was extremely hungry and obviously confused, but nobody knows what happened or how. It's been many years now, and to this day nobody has any clue what happened. Watched by a shadow man at midnight, 6 years ago, still freaks me out to this day. My stepdad has his own house, and my mom and I moved in during my first year of high school when I was 14. Everything went well for a year, and I got first pick of my room, the one closest to the lounge, so my baby sister could be closer to my parents. Our rooms are along the passageway on the left, and across from it are the bathroom and the kitchen doors. The lounge had a door, and my parents had the room at the end of the hallway, and the lounge door was directly across from it. We have a house alarm system, and we would close the doors to the kitchen and lounge, locking the lounge one, so our cat wouldn't trip the alarm. The room next door was largely unoccupied since my sister is clingy and slept with my parents more than not, but it didn't bug me. The 2 rooms are exactly the same size and are quite small, but my mom gave me her queen-size bed, and because my room is tiny, the foot of the bed is about half a ruler's length away from the door when open, which it always is, not fully because I have a desk stopping it at the foot of my bed. One night in mid-March or so I woke up at about 2 a.m., no idea why, but all I knew is I was scared. I looked up towards my door, and a light was on somewhere very faintly. I still don't know where, but it wasn't from any of the rooms, and in the light was a person standing at the foot of my bed, half covered by the door. He was short and stocky and had a hat on. He looked like an old-school mafia member in those movies, with a suit jacket and one of those hats that big bosses in those same movies wear. I can't think of the name. He had no face, and he didn't move. He just stood. I thought my stepdad had come to check on me, but something told me not to call out. I dove under my covers and prayed until I passed out. I couldn't make sure he wasn't there. In fact, I think he stood there until after I passed out. I was sure I was awake, and the next morning I asked my mom and my stepdad if he had checked on me. No one had been awake or come into my room to check up on me. My mom was skeptical when I told her, and my stepfather too, but they believed me. It never came back, but a year and a bed changed to a single later, I felt the same presence behind me in the same spot twice, but it was a woman. I never looked at her, I never said anything. I just stayed awake until I finally dozed off. I am now even more petrified of the dark at 22 and don't sleep without my phone torch being on or the light on. I still live in the house, in the same bedroom. I haven't seen or felt either since, but I sometimes get very uncomfortable in the middle of the night. No one else in the house has been plagued by shadow people either. Just me. My mom sometimes hallucinates them because of her meds, but nothing like my experience. That was back in 2016, I was alone in the living room at around 3 a.m. reading manga on my laptop, nothing scary or something like that. My bunny at the time was a little over a year old, and we had her in her cage for the night in the living room. I always used to sleep late while my family slept in their rooms. That same night, I had only the TV and the living room light on across the room just for a mild background noise. Every window and door was closed since it was April and it was kind of chilly, especially at night. We used to have the bag of bread in the living room hanging from a pole since it was closer to the fridge. The kitchen was small, so the fridge couldn't be in there. Okay, so while I was reading without a single noise or anything around, suddenly I caught from my peripheral vision something small and dark popping out of nowhere close to where the bread was. I immediately turn around, and I lock eyes with a small, brownish, devil-like creature with pointy ears and a long tail and yellow eyes right on the bag of bread, looking straight at me with what seemed like utter shock. It had its eyes wide open, and it just overall seemed shocked. All that happened in a matter of seconds, in which when it saw me looking right at it, it flew through the closed balcony door, which was close to where we had the bag of bread, and I remained looking at the bag, having the motion of when you leave something hanging until it stops since I wanted to make sure what I saw was real. When it stopped after a few seconds, I turned around to look at my bunny having her eyes wide open at that exact same spot, and a little while later she started hitting her back legs in her cage. That's what bunnies do when they're annoyed or when they sense danger. Bruh, that right there proved to me what I saw was indeed not my imagination. No way my bunny would react like that out of nowhere without any sound. I had asked around the internet back then about what it could be, and one Mexican girl had told me it's a duende, but after some research I found out it didn't look like anything of that at all. A couple of years ago I had shared my story online, and someone reached out to me and showed me a video asking if that's what I saw, which looked almost identical. Turns out it seems to have been an imp, one that is being said in the Germanic folklore, since that's what looks the closest to it. Mind you, I have never before looked into folklore or anything like that, and I'm not religious at all even to this day. I don't really believe in everything being supernatural, but I definitely believe what I saw was damn real. Midnight at the Boneyard. I've been scaring myself sleepless the past few nights reading about skinwalkers, and, since I won't be sleeping, I figure I'll share one of my unexplained encounters. This happened maybe 5 years ago. I was able recently to discuss with my friend our encounter that night, and it was he who reminded me of the second part, something I had pushed to the back of my mind. I was staying with a friend to work on some music, and after grinding for a few hours, we were burnt out. Naturally, we thought we'd relieve some of the burn with a touch of California's finest herbal tobacco alternative. At that moment, I realized that I had left my stash at home and that my friend might only have a bowl left. Having both dabbled in the esoteric before, we thought it'd be a good idea to head over to the old cemetery and burn the bowl there, maybe freak ourselves out a bit. Both stone sober, we hop in the car and arrive at the cemetery a few minutes later. We pull through the open gate and look about for other cars or people. We believe we've seen some serious underground business transactions late at night at this particular cemetery, and we're more scared of bullets than ghosts. We've been pretty high energy all day, and our excitement for the imminent bowl had us talkative again. As soon as we open the doors of the car, our mood changes and we become very quiet and uneasy. Graves are spooky, right? So we postpone the bowl and begin to walk around, looking at gravestones, reading dates, and vibing the place out. I can't shake the feeling of our not being alone, but I tell myself it's me worrying about interrupting a heroin deal. Nevertheless, I am being very careful about where I am setting foot, striving to be as respectful of the dead as a guy who just broke into a cemetery to smoke drugs could be. My friend is walking down a row of headstones, those flagstone kinds that are set into the ground, not the vertical kind, and I am following about 1.5 meters behind. I am looking with each step at where I place my foot. I should mention here that I have excellent night vision and could read the names and dates of the tombstones perfectly well without additional illumination. Suddenly, I notice a movement 2.5 meters to my right and slightly behind me. My spine snaps straight. Without even stopping to think, I begin to turn to see what is there. Even though I see nothing, I can still feel the movement continuing to my right, as though circling me to stay out of my range of vision. I turn around a full rotation but can still feel this movement, so I complete another half rotation. What I see stops me dead. There on the ground, right where I had set my foot a few seconds before and definitely where I would have seen it on my first rotation, is a single white rose. This rose isn't sitting at a tombstone or in the middle of a plot but sort of between two plots where both my friend and I had been walking. A little later that night, I keep seeing these two sort of flashes of movement about 35 meters out but chalk it up to nerves. Well, my buddy must have caught me looking, because he asks with relief, "You saw that, right?" We remain still and quiet and continue to stare into the night where we had seen the movement. 2 or 3 more times we see it, and we agree that it looks like one small form chasing another through the tombstones. We even watch the shapes pass behind tombstones, which are nearly high enough to fully obscure the specters. "It looks like 2 kids playing tag," one of us says to the other's immediate agreement. We need to check it out. We agree on where the activity is occurring and use some trees as landmarks to be sure we walk to the right spot. After we figure the activity has died down, we approach. I think there are some among you who will not be surprised that when we got the location, we found the graves of 2 children next to one another. They were 4 and 6 when they died. That did it for us, and we both started back toward the car. Looking back to where the children's graves were, I swear I saw a child's face peek around a tombstone at me. We never smoked that bowl. As a child, I felt a dark presence in my room every night. So I'm aware that the feeling might not be paranormal at all, but it's something that continues to play on my mind. And I wonder if it's something other people here have felt, whether something paranormal or just mental. When I was a child, from the time I was in primary school to the time I moved out of my parents' house, I would wake up in the middle of the night absolutely terrified and filled with dread. It was for no reason. I hadn't had a nightmare or watched a scary film. It was just sometime after midnight, I would always wake up with the feeling that there was a dark presence in my room. It was a feeling like my blood was simmering, and I could sense something in my bedroom that shouldn't be there. It felt like the air would get really heavy, and it would make me shiver but not physically, just shuddering underneath the skin. A lot of the time, I'd go into my parents' room or my brother's room at that point in the night and sleep on the floor. I even had a mattress just for when I need to sleep in someone else's room. I have anxiety nowadays, but it's never felt like the heavy, dark shivering feeling I'd get every night in my bedroom as a kid. But, I actually do wonder if maybe I always had anxiety, and that was how it manifested itself when I was a child, feeling it as some sort of haunting, because that's how I could make sense of it. I haven't felt that way since I left home. But I dream about that feeling often. The air hangs heavy in my childhood bedroom, a dark, unsettling feeling enveloping me. Typing it out feels really silly, because I feel like, okay, it was probably just me being a nervous kid. But there was something about it that just felt so eerie and wrong. The night I'll forever remember. This happened 8 years ago at my grandparents' ancestral house. Apart from the usual mischief of the duende, the Spanish/Latin American counterpart of gnomes, I think, our house rarely displays apparitions from the other world. We have a superstitious belief that we should never leave a house without any person or people for a long period of time. If you do, someone or something might live there, i.e., malevolent spirits. Our house was built in the late 70s. The ground floor was used as our living quarters, while the upper floor just gathered dust because I have only my mom and my brother residing there in a single room for the time being. One night, I was talking with my so through the phone on the second floor of our house. I went there because of privacy while also maintaining the silence on the ground floor. The time, if I recall, was past midnight. We've always been talking like this from the evening till the wee hours in the morning. As I was trying to make her laugh, I saw a tentacle-like long, grayish-white thing fitting through the jalousie window, the one colored brown. I'm describing it as a tentacle because of the motion it makes. It is slithering, which is what I thought of at the time, its whole body forcing its way to come in. At first my brain is still not that afraid because it might be a snake, for we have many trees inside our property. Notice I said tentacles? Because I can't for the life of me relate that thing to a human hand. I just saw it as a long white thing. Know how a grandma uses her hands to do Tai Chi? That's the way it is moving. Next thing I know there is another long thing, which I now realize is its other hand, to get inside also. What ducked my brains out was its head was trying to get inside also. I am afraid that's why I can't look at its face. My breath is now shallow, I can't think of anything. I am stuttering, and my so noticed it too and asked why. I told her what I saw and said, "Keep talking to me." I shut my eyes, but once I opened them, it was still there. Now it's waving its hands and shaking its head vigorously so it knows that I can see it. From my illustration, you could see that I am sitting at the edge of the bed. I muster up my courage and nudge myself a little so I won't be able to see him. I think I moved 12 inches to the right just so I could remove him from my vision. Know what it did? It also moved to its right, which is another window, just so I can also see it. This thing knows that I'm afraid. In the beginning, the motion of its hand is like a Tai Chi grandma. Now it is dabbing to its right, so I can see both of its hands. Once that happened, I steeled myself and almost jumped the stairs to go to my brother and mother. After a few moments I asked him to go with me, but we didn't find anything. Seems nothing out of the ordinary happened. What bothers me up to this day is I can't remember if I looked at its face or just the peripheral vision because every time I try to remember its face, I just see a blank face. No eyes. No mouth. No facial hair. Just blank. Up to this day I don't know what kind of ghost that is, but typing this up until 3 a.m. gives me the chill. Fear of the dark, A tale of the entity that terrorized me as a child. I have had a few different paranormal experiences in my lifetime. This has resulted in me traveling the country any chance I get to investigate the paranormal. Simply to understand and get a better grip or understanding of what has happened to me or anyone else. There are many non-believers, but believe me, this stuff is very real. I do plan on sharing all my experiences here eventually, but I'll start with the Shadow Man. This happened when I was young, and it has disturbed me far worse than any other experience. When I was 10, my mom had just given birth to my brother. We lived in a small apartment, so this resulted in us moving to a rental home. The home was simple enough, a small brick house near some farmland in the southern USA. It was neat because a Native American historical site was within walking distance. I was excited about the move. The first few weeks in the house were normal enough. My stepdad got a new work schedule, so we had to change sleeping arrangements. Before, we would all just sort of watch TV and pass out whenever. His new schedule was getting to work by 4 a.m., so that meant lights out early. I remember being upset that all the lights had to be out early, and I could not fall asleep at that time. Lying awake in pure darkness, I had a feeling of fear come over me. Next thing I know, I was on the ceiling looking down at my body. I stayed up there paralyzed for a few minutes. I will never forget it. Still to this day, 20 plus years later, this is the only time an out-of-body experience has ever happened to me. Of course, I told my mom I was terrified. She says nightmare, but I was not asleep. I remember being tired at school because I snuck and turned my closet light on all night until my stepdad woke up. I remained awake throughout the night. The next day after school I fell asleep for a long nap. That was pretty much the only time I would get any rest for the next few nights. When the lights went out the next night, I did not sleep. I kept thinking about the ceiling experience. My bedroom was connected to a large open den and hallway where my baby brother's crib was located. This den also had a sliding door to the backyard/pasture. I had my door cracked halfway, and as I turned my attention from the ceiling to the door, that's when it started to happen. What I refer to as the fear started to come over me. A tingly, frightening sensation. That's when I saw it. A solid black shadowy figure that wasn't exactly man-shaped but resembled a man is the best way I know to describe it. The shadow stood there, watching me from outside the doorway. All of a sudden I felt a pressure on my chest and throat area like this thing was taking my breath and life right out of me. I wanted to scream, but I could not. Eventually, I could breathe, and the entity just disappeared back to the hallway where it came from, and I went screaming to my mom again. Of course, another nightmare, she says as I'm falling asleep on the way to school. I remember getting yelled at by teachers for trying to sleep in class. The next night would be my final encounter with the shadow man, entity, alien, or whatever it was. This time, I beg my mom to leave my light on. She tells me I can turn it back on when my stepdad falls asleep. I'm wide awake, scared to death, and nothing happens for a long time. Then the feeling comes, like clockwork. I'm not sure what time these events occur, but if I had to guess, I'd say around midnight. This time the figure appears to float right up beside my bed and put their hands around my neck, the same feeling as before, but closer. I am terrified but cannot move or breathe, and I am wide awake. Sucking the life out of me. Repeat the no sleep process until early morning or on the way to school. Repeat, mom saying it's a nightmare. Thankfully, my stepdad suggests buying me a TV for my room that I keep on at night. I'm not sure if these entities hate the light. Whatever the situation, I never saw the thing again. Doesn't change the fact that I still fear the dark and sleep with a TV on to this very day. Before, I was never afraid. Before, I never cared about the paranormal. Ever since that week, I research and seek answers. These things are real, and I do not believe scientists have it all figured out by saying sleep paralysis because I was never asleep. Mankind has experienced shadow people for centuries. The paranormal is something you have to experience before you become a believer. Insights would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for listening. Keep the lights on, and stay safe out there. I had an encounter with a shadow person out of the blue at literally the most random of times, and I swear it made me crazy. I was talking with a friend of mine when I looked out my window and saw a black faceless figure looking at me from behind my tree. I remember I blinked like 5 times, and it wouldn't disappear, so I freaked the duck out and yelled at my friend to hurry up and close my curtain. I was in shock. She freaked. I didn't look outside after that. What happened? What I do know is the months following, I was in a very depressing state, and I couldn't really eat or do anything but cry. I couldn't sleep at night until 5 a.m. when the sun would start to come up. One night I smoked a blunt, and I had a big frame with the Virgin Mary. Sometime after midnight, I looked at it, and her eyes were rolling around. That whole 6-month period felt like hell. I heard footsteps in my hall at night that would run rapidly and then stop, and then start again. I would always just get the feeling someone was there. I mean, when I saw the shadow, it didn't have a face, but I felt the intensity of its watch. It, stayed engraved in me. Well, I was getting worse and worse, skinnier and skinnier, and my mom called a curandera over to our house, my neighbor. She did this weird-ass thing with a Bible, some alcohol, and a plant. We prayed for a solid 30 minutes, and she rubbed some alcohol on my head, literally the top of my head. She said that my soul wasn't in my body, it needed to find me again. When we get scared, it leaves through the top of our head, she said. I felt like I was being watched because it was trying to come back but couldn't. Needless to say, that night as soon as she left, I knocked the F out. I hadn't gotten sleep like that at all for months. I started dreaming again, or at least being able to remember them again. I gained my appetite, and I don't feel like I'm being watched. I still hear footsteps, but it's not at all the same feeling. Just wanted to share a story with y'all. 100% true. Do you all have any similar experiences? Late night scare. A little backstory. Back when I first moved into the state I currently live in, I had done a bit of couch surfing before finally being able to find a roommate. We moved into a rather old apartment in the quieter part of the big city. When I say old, I mean radiator heating, electricity so bad that running too many things in sockets popped the breaker, etc. I was the first to move in because my roommate had not yet gotten into the state. They were moving from Oz. I had no furniture or anything, so I was sleeping on the floor. By default, I always close the door to the room I am sleeping in. I do this out of habit. Even when I'm alone in a place, I always close the door. One thing I noticed about the door is that it took quite a bit of force to get it shut. No big deal, I got it closed. Went to bed, and that was that. When I woke up, the door was wide open. I found it strange because I had given the door a little tug before bunkering down on the floor. I didn't think much of it at the time until it kept happening. After a while, I noticed the apartment started to have a weird feeling. About a week later, my roommate finally arrived and moved in. On and off, weird things would happen outside of the door being opened when I would wake up. There were sounds of someone rustling in the kitchen and footsteps long after both I and my roommate went to bed. I would know if it was them because they always turned the hallway lights on when going to the bathroom or kitchen. For the year and a half we lived there, that seemed to be the only bit of disturbance. Nothing major. Fast forward to a year later, and I had a friend from CO come visit for a week. The night had crept up on us, and we were going to hit downtown the following morning rather early. So we turned in for the night. They slept on the pull-out couch in the living room. I went to my room and shut the door firmly. I passed out rather quickly. I was only out for an hour before I was awakened by a creaking noise and the jiggling of my bedroom's door handle. I opened my eyes only to watch the door slowly open and then stop after it was wide open. I assumed that maybe I just didn't shut it properly, but it still felt weird. I got up and closed the door. I pulled the hood of the hoodie I wore to bed up due to the freezing temperatures in the dead of winter, then curled back into bed. Only a few minutes had passed before I felt something snatch hold of the hood of my hoodie and yank back as if trying to tug me along with it. I froze, my heart pounding. I had no idea what was happening, and I know I wasn't dreaming. Once everything had settled, my nerves included, I tried to get a little more sleep. Morning came, and I went out of my room to meet my friend, who was just waking up. I asked them if they heard my door opening at all during the night. They were confused, answered no, and got up for their morning routine. I cannot explain what happened. I may have been amping myself up out of fear, or it could have very well been a spirit in that apartment. Both are plausible, but it doesn't take away just how scary it was in the moment. I think about it now and then, and if I'm going to be honest, I am so glad I moved out of that apartment later that year. I was in my early 20s. At the age of 32, I stayed at a modest roadside hotel with my ex-partner and his family. We had no toilet paper in our room, so I offered to go to the office to get some since I love nighttime anyways. This was fall time, my favorite season. Anyways, I decided to take the way behind the building, as our room was on the very end of the backside. I want to say it was a 3 to 4 minute walk to the office. I had a habit of looking down more than paying attention to where I was going at that time in my life. So upon my third glance up, halfway there, to make sure I wasn't going to run into something, I briefly noticed this woman walking in my direction. Another guest, I assumed, despite the huge knot and sick feeling I suddenly got in my stomach, and continued walking. As she got closer, I started to subtly look at her. This woman was wearing a black dress that did not look anything of this time. It looked vintage Victorian, maybe. And she was wearing a big hat. I'm talking huge brimmed, over one eye style with the big decorations on top with lace over the face. As she got closer I tried to see her face. I wish I wouldn't have. To this day her face haunts me. If you've ever seen Grimm, you know what a hexen beast, forgive me if my spelling is off, is. Her face literally looked like that. I told myself she was a burn victim, but the feeling of doom I got when I saw her face. I did not look behind me after I passed her, I didn't want to. I got to the office, got the TP, and was about to leave out the door to walk back when my ex and his sister walked in. The timing, they would have had to have seen her. So I subtly joked about the lady in the Victorian getup. They both looked at me like I was crazy. I then got serious and asked them if they saw her. They told me that they only saw me around the building when they started walking in that direction. If they saw me, then they should have also seen her. To this day I have no idea who she was or what the hell I saw, but it still haunts me. I still love nighttime, though. When I was 16, my parents went on a trip to Mexico, and it was just my 4 sisters at home. I was woken up by my older sister because the alarm was going off and she was crying on the phone to her long-distance boyfriend. I never understood how he would help. I quickly checked what door was messed with, made sure it was still locked, and made sure everything was fine. I talked my sister down and eventually chalked it up to the wind pushing the door and making the very sensitive sensor go off. After about an hour and me falling back asleep, she wakes me up again, hysterical and bawling her eyes out, and the alarm was off. I told her to shut it off, which she did, and just as that happened, I heard the front glass door close. We had 2 doors, one in front of the other. I was really scared, so I waited a moment and quickly ran to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find and scoped the house. My sister followed me while still talking on the phone with her BF. I went downstairs to look through the basement windows to see if I could see anything from that angle. I opened my twin's curtain, and I saw shoes, and they were directly in front of our large dining room window, and he was facing our house. I can only assume he was looking for someone. I totally freaked out and called 911 immediately, and I ran upstairs to see if I could actually see who it was, and I saw a man running to a car parked in my neighbor's driveway. I had never seen him before, and I knew for certain he wasn't actually living there. He slowly drove away but rolled his window down completely and just stared at me while driving away. The police came a few minutes after that and told me I was crazy and I didn't see anything. Next time shut off the alarm and don't waste their time. We never had an incident quite like that again, but a lot of very spooky things continued to happen at that house. A strange house sighting. This happened around 2013. I and a buddy were bored one night and decided to grab some McDonald's and cruise around some back roads. Now we both lived on a Native American reservation at the time, so you can believe me when I say there was a whole lot of nothing around us as we cruised around. We were driving on top of these mesas, and the road up ahead went down one of them in a long, curving manner. Before the road goes down, however, there's a spot to pull over and look out for miles from a cool vantage point. But since it was around midnight, you couldn't see much except for some lights way off in the distance, if that. So I and my friend get out of the car and just chill outside for a bit. I walk over to the edge of this mesa that looks out for miles, and I start howling really loudly. I was doing that just to hear the echo it was making. After a few minutes of this, I eventually look down the cliff I'm standing on. I see some house lights just below us. Like a stone's throw away. There was clearly some light coming from 2 windows. I tell my buddy that there's a house just below where we're at, and he looks over and sees it too. I tell him we better get out of here because I was just howling like an idiot, and the people in that house were probably going to call the police. So we take off, and thus ends the night. Well, about 2 weeks later we were cruising around the same spot, only this time during the day. We pull over at the same area and get out to look at the view. Remembering the house from that night, I look over the cliff, and to my surprise, there's nothing there. But not only was there nothing there, the area I was looking at was so steep and rocky that building a house there wouldn't even be possible. I brought it up to my friend, and we were both pretty stumped. There's not much of a description I can give you about the house I saw from that night other than it looked to be built from adobe. I remember seeing stone walls from the lights coming from the windows. I couldn't see inside the windows either due to the higher angle we were on. Anyways, it's a cool story I have in my back pocket whenever people ask if I've had any weird experiences. Thanks for listening. About 6 or 7 years ago, a friend and I were on our way to visit another excellent friend of ours, who had moved to a small town for a teaching job in a state high school. All of us grew up in the same seaside state capital, and the small town we are visiting is located about 120 kilometers away from it via a bad, curvy, and slippery road. The route is very scenic, as it passes through hills and a natural reserve. I can't remember much of the trip per se, but it doesn't matter. I was driving, and we hopped onto the highway that goes inland. Rain was pouring down, and we were listening to Black Flag whilst talking about music when I stopped at a gas station because the gas was going low, and this friend and I were kind of charmers, so we start some small talk with the cashier, and I mention we're going to São Bonifácio. The cashier then mentions a shortcut through a dirt road instead of the usual highway, citing that it would cut 30 minutes short of our trip, but it wasn't safe given the weather conditions. I emphasized that it was raining hard. But we're both idiots, and, at the time, drunk idiots, so we kept an eye on the entrance and took the shortcut. It was a rocky road that cut through the Atlantic forest, probably illegal, since it also cut through a national park. Due to the heavy rain, it was especially rocky and muddy, so I had to keep a steady speed of about 5 to 10 km/h in a 2015 Ford Ka, mind you. There was not a single light in sight. Not a house, not a streetlight. Only the car headlights were showing nothing but water pouring down and a disgusting, horrible road ahead. We were joking about when the rain stopped, and my friend said he wanted to take that chance to take a leak. So I just stopped in the middle of the road and told him to hurry up. He then covers his shoes with a pair of plastic bags from the beers we bought and goes to the front of the car. I honk a few times just for the duck of it, to take a few laughs at the situation, and he moves a little forward where the headlight doesn't hit him. It took the time to light a cigarette to hear him kind of exclaim, sort of yell in fright, like when you are taken by surprise by something. The guy ran back to the car, slipping and falling on the ground and ducking up all my passenger seat with his muddy pants, slamming the door. Then he looks at me and says he saw what he believed was a mountain lion, or a susuarana, as we call it here, and that I should slam the ducking gas and get the duck out of there. I could not do that, since it would duck up my car's suspension. Instead, I turn off the music, we wait a little, and nothing happens. After about 20 seconds, we both see a huge, and I mean a huge, figure move between the trees. About 2 meters tall or so, and we could not see much, only black fur and eyes that reflected the car's headlight. As fast as we saw it, the thing went left, back to the woods. I think I speak for both of us when I say we were absolutely frozen and ecstatic. To this day, I still don't know how I could remain calm enough to start the car and slowly drive away to our friend's place. We told him about it, and he said it was probably a mountain lion still. But the ducking thing was 2 meters tall. And I swear I could hear its steps as it ran away, despite the windows being closed. Native American spirits? So, my mom had always been one to tell me and my brothers ghost stories when we were younger. She lived in the small town of Lexington, Virginia, and when it comes to this town's past, well, the town is comprised of a bunch of old houses from the last 300 years, some of which are on top of the battlefields from the Civil War. Needless to say, you can see soldiers roaming lot. One thing that has always stuck with me is a story my mom has told me countless times over the years. In this story, my uncle had picked my mother up from the movie theater in the uptown part of Lexington after she got off work. There's a bridge that takes you up to Campbell Lane if you're coming from Main Street. This bridge is high up and surrounded by large downhill slopes of trees and properties with long stairways winding down from the road, gated because somehow they think a chain fence will help stop a car from sliding down into their yard. Regardless, if you don't turn onto Campbell, the bridge goes back down to Route 11. My grandmother lived, and still does, on McCorkle Drive, the first street on Campbell. When my mother and uncle were driving up the hill, she explained that it was foggy and they were taking their time, and then they saw this woman, with long gray hair and a poncho-like cloth draped over her, looking almost like a native woman, and as they passed her on the hill, she went to open her poncho, staring straight at my mother, but they passed her before she revealed whatever it was, and so my uncle quickly whipped the car around to find nothing. Now, I cannot express to you the impossibility of her hiding, for there is nowhere to go besides downhill to her death or onto a property, and if that were the case, they still would have seen her on the long path. The weird part of this story is what happened 2 years ago and what happened this summer. My uncle Mike, at the time of their encounter, was 19 years old. My mother was 16. 2 years later, she started dating a guy named Kendall. One night, my grandfather was home with my mother and her 3 siblings, all of whom knew the story of this woman but never spoke of it to anyone, including my grandmother and Kendall, 2 people close to them. My mother and her immediate family were talking and watching television when there was a knock on the door. My grandfather answered it, and Kendall rushed in, looked at my mother, and uttered words I believe she knew she'd hear one day: "Bridget, you are not going to believe what I just saw." He sat on the couch with all of them. Now bear with me, I was not there, so I don't know exactly the story he had told. My mother only told me that he saw the same woman at the opposite end of the neighborhood where, once again but more extreme, there is nowhere to go but downhill, and this time into a lake about 400 feet down an 80-degree or so steep hill. Once more, this woman lifted her poncho and disappeared into a foggy night. Kendall was 19 at the time, my mom was 18. This summer, I have had the privilege of driving by myself to places. My grandmother is a worrywart, and I haven't been allowed to go anywhere since I was only a teenager, and apparently that meant that if I were to go out alone, I would die. So one night I went to play a prank on my friend here at the river. A few of us decided we were going to invite her for a midnight swim and dress up like river monsters, but it didn't turn out like we wanted it to. We failed miserably, and she wasn't the least bit scared. Feeling disappointed at 2 in the morning, we all decided to go our separate ways. Now, something about this town, Lexington. Every night there's some fog, it's part of living in/near mountains. But that night, last Friday June 13th or 14th or so, it was so foggy I was driving like 12 miles an hour down the 35-mile-per-hour road. I turned onto the bridge and accelerated until I saw a figure standing at the middle of the hill in the fog, a frail figure, short and somewhat enchanting. I was going to slow down, but that would be creepy, for I had no clue who this was. As I passed, my heart stopped, for I was looking into the eye of something my mother had seen 30 years ago, an old Native American-looking woman. She had a long face, and though I saw it, all I was focused on was her hair and her clothing. Like my mom described to me so long before this, she had long ash-colored hair in a middle part, almost to her waist, as well as light canvas material draped around her shoulders, covering her body. As I passed, she started to lift the material up, and then she was behind my car. I did something that my uncle, mother, and Kendall had not. I stopped my car, shifted to park, and then jumped out of my car. I looked around for half an hour, car running, and there was no one. No one had jumped, no one was around, and no one was on the paths or on the other roads. I was alone, and at that moment I realized something. I'm 19 this summer. What would bring her back? And what does it mean if we were all the same age? What could seeing her possibly mean, if anything? Any help would be awesome, guys, it's been bothering me the past few days. The girl in the corner. When I was 3 or 4 years old, I lived on a farm with my parents and sister. I have one memory of seeing a small shadow in the corner of the room. The shadow didn't resemble a humanoid figure, just a small shadow in a dark room in the corner. That is all. After bringing this up with my mum a couple years ago, I'm now 23, she told me the full story. Apparently, I told her for a while that I would see a girl in the corner of my room. Then one night, I was crying. My mum comes in, sits with me, and holds me while I tell her that I see a girl who doesn't blink. Fast forward. Maybe a week after this happened, my mom apparently contacted a lady who works with spirits or something and advised my mom to light candles in the room and attempt to communicate with her. Well, she did that and told her to move on, etc. My mom told me I wasn't seeing the girl after she did this. Fast forward some time after that, my mom discovered that a little girl, probably 40 or so years prior to us moving in, had drowned in the dam. How crazy is this, right? I'm glad I found this channel, but I've been kind of scared to share it. Gut feeling kind of thing. And look, I understand if there are going to be a lot of people calling bullshit, but hey, whatever, I'm just going to use this community to share my experience to see if there's anyone with a similar experience. So's for scaring anyone, but yeah. Crazy story, right? I'm not religious or anything, but this story has always set me on the path of skepticism towards anything. I'm a type of see it to believe it type of person, even in regard to things such as the existence of space. Cheers. Shadows. Hi, I'm new here, but I have had many paranormal or just weird experiences in my life. Once when I was around 12-13 years old, I used to stay up late and play on my phone and hide under my pillow when I heard my dad coming to check on me. My dad would come into my room, pretend to leave, and check if I was really asleep. One night I heard someone coming towards my room, so I did what I always do. Pretended to be asleep and hid my phone underneath my pillows. When I heard them leave, I got up again. When I did, I saw a man. He was 6 feet, buff, and wearing a baseball cap. I couldn't see anything else, as it was dark in the room, but my dad is 6 feet and buff and also wore baseball caps. Scared of getting grounded, I made up an excuse. I said, "Sorry, Dad, my friend is going through a rough time, and I wanted to make sure she was okay." When I said this, I got no response, so I hugged them and said goodnight. The man didn't say anything, not even a whisper. Confused and starting to get scared, I asked, "Dad? You okay?" I got this weird kind of growl back. So I just turned my back and closed my eyes. When I woke up, I was in a really bad mood with my dad. I thought he took a joke too far and really scared me. When my dad asked about it, I told him. He looked concerned. He then informed me that he was working overnight and he hadn't been home until this morning. He said it was my grandma in the house. My gran at the time was a 5 feet frail woman. At this time she wasn't able to stand straight. The person I saw was 6 feet and buff. My family chalked it up to me watching too many horror films. But it was so real. Now, I think back. I think it was a shadow person, but how could I hug them? And if it was a person, then how did they get into the house? Nothing was stolen. What could have been a grim scene outside my convenience store? This was back when I was 18, to my best recollection. It was my first job, and this was now 6 years ago. I still remember it pretty well, though. It still bothers me at night since I've moved back to the area. We closed at midnight, and with my schedule, I usually closed. I would bring my gargantuan German Shepherd with me because as a young girl walking home alone, a companion that looks like it could eat people is helpful. Remember, this is a small town with relatively dispersed amenities. The aforementioned walk home was about 2 hours long and 5 miles. So I was a ways off from anything at all. If you don't have a car in our town, you're a little bit screwed. But at about 11:30, a guy bursts through the door and flees to the back of the store. Great, a drunk who drove in for a snack or mixers. Not uncommon. Except for his muttering about how something was after him, something was following him. Almost like an afterthought, he looks up at me and yells for me to lock the door, there's something outside. I was in the process of locking up, so the pump lights were already off, and it was dark as hell outside. And, honestly, I knew Tisha, my dog, could handle this guy if he was planning to assault me, but I was not so certain about anything outside. So I go to lock the doors, and Tisha, already on edge about this dude, follows me, hackles raised and freaked out. I knock the door open slightly and look outside, and all I can see are yellowed white teeth, like a dog's, bared and barreling towards the door. I slam it shut behind me and lock it. Something black except for a pair of red eyes slammed against the glass door, and then I could vaguely make out a huge dog slink off into nowhere. I called the cops. I was worried they would refer me to animal control, but apparently they thought we were high, so they sent out an officer. The guy who'd rushed into the store was a local. He'd been out drinking and started to feel followed while walking home. So he took a number of detours, trying to shake whatever was following him, and somehow ended up here, about 5 miles away from the bar. The cop didn't know what to make of it and gave us a ride home. I still don't know what that was and quit shortly thereafter. Where did the time go? When I was 20, I took a job as a direct care worker at a group home for adults with developmental disabilities. The home I worked in had 6 residents. All of whom had severe physical and mental impairments. None of the residents had the ability to walk or communicate. They were all tube-fed and needed 24-hour care and supervision. I worked the midnight shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. When I arrived for my shift, the residents were already tucked into bed. It was overall a pretty boring job. I worked with one other person, and we cleaned the house and stocked up on supplies while they slept. Every 2 hours we would check the residents' briefs and change them as necessary. We also had 2 medications to pass during our shift, and in the last hour we would give 2 residents showers. One night my coworker and I were just settling into our shift. I started a pot of coffee, and we chatted. It was around 10:30 p.m. We had baby monitors in the residents' rooms and in the kitchen so we could hear them if they were in distress. Suddenly we heard our resident, we'll call her Rachel, through the monitor. She was coughing and gagging uncontrollably. My coworker and I jumped up because we knew what was happening. Rachel had been congested that week, and she didn't have the ability to roll herself over. This had happened several times in the past, and it was always a serious situation. The excessive coughing could cause her to vomit, in which case she could aspirate and die. We tended to Rachel immediately, rolling her on her side and using a special suction machine to clear her mouth. Sure enough, she had vomited quite a bit, and we had gotten to her just in time. After a while her coughing ceased and her breathing returned to normal. We cleaned her up, changed her clothes and bedding, and made sure she was propped up better with pillows. Adrenaline was still pumping through us, as the whole situation was a bit frightening for a couple of 20-year-olds with minimal medical training. We agreed we would check in on Rachel frequently for the rest of the night and write an incident report. My coworker and I left the resident area and headed back toward the common room. I was ready for my coffee, and she was ready for a cigarette. She headed outside, and I went to fill my cup. That's when I noticed the lights on the coffee pot weren't on. That's weird, I thought it was plugged in, and I hadn't tripped the breaker. I started pouring my cup, and I realized it was ice cold. That didn't make sense to me. I had just started the coffee less than an hour ago, why wasn't it hot? I rolled my eyes, figuring something must be wrong with the coffee pot. I dumped it out and went to start again when my coworker barged through the back door. Her eyes were huge. A little startled, I asked her what was wrong. She asked me if I'd looked at the clock. I immediately looked up and saw that it read 5:30 a.m. Before I could make sense of things, she shoved her cell phone in my face, which also read 5:30 a.m. We couldn't have been with Rachel longer than 45 minutes. We had lost around 7 hours. Neither of us could make sense of it. We walked into the back of the house and walked out 7 hours later without time feeling like it had passed at all. We hadn't given out meds, done bed checks, given showers, or cleaned anything. The next shift was coming in half an hour, and it felt like we had just arrived. We did our best to pull it together and at least make it look like we'd worked all night. When the next shift arrived, we just sat at the table silently and left. We never told any of our coworkers about the experience. It sounded crazy. If I hadn't experienced it myself, I wouldn't believe it either. My coworker and I lost touch eventually as we both moved on to other jobs. We recently found each other on social media. She sent me a message and asked me about that day. Our memories of the event are exactly the same. Nothing like that has ever happened to either of us again. I have no idea what happened in those 7 hours. I do know that there was never a problem with the coffee pot. It timed out after 4 hours and shut itself off. Something in the field. I'm going to preface this by saying I'm a firm non-believer in the paranormal. I'm the kind of person to rationalize most unexplained phenomena with whatever logical explanation makes the most sense, which is why this occurrence scared me more than usual and gave me all the more reason to share this story. To give a bit of context, I live with my partner in a semi-rural area in the UK, just a few houses along a road that then splits off into the surrounding forest and farmland. There's a particular road that runs along the border of a field that we like to take walks on from time to time. It's a thin road that can only really fit one car at a time, and there are tall hedges on either side separating the road from the fields. We usually walk along the entirety of the road because it loops round back to our house. Well, one particular night, it was about 11 p.m., and we weren't very tired, so we thought it would be cool to do a night walk, so we grabbed a flashlight, because there is zero lighting on these roads, and decided to head down this road. We got about 1/4 through our walk when we both started to hear the noise of flesh ripping, and by that I mean the sounds you usually hear when you watch an animal on a documentary eating another animal, the sounds of them ripping the skin away to get to the muscle, etc. It sounded very wet, and it sounded like something was eating very messily. My best guess, as I grew up in the countryside, was that it was a bird of prey or a fox eating something it had just caught, but this sounded bigger. This wasn't something like a mouse or a rabbit getting eaten, it was loud, and whatever was eating it was just going at it. We used the flashlight to try and see through the hedge and catch an eye reflection, but it was too thick. There was also currently no livestock in this field at this time. We probably got to within 10 to 15 feet of the source of the noise, and then it suddenly stopped, like it heard us, and at that point my instincts started taking over and a fear started building up in me, partly due to the fact that I couldn't logically explain what I was hearing. So we decided to turn around and walk back, quite quickly, back home. The next morning I went back to the area where I heard it to see if I could find any trace of a dead animal, etc., but there was nothing, a lot of flattened grass in the area as if something had been sitting there, but no blood, no bones. I still don't know what it was, and I haven't gone out there at night since. My best guess is that it was a predator eating a catch, but I just can't get around how big it sounded. Hope you enjoyed this story. Looking back, I wish I had the balls to get closer, but it just didn't feel right. Something luring us in? So about 3 weeks ago, I and my friends had been hanging out for a couple of hours, and the sun was starting to set. At the time, we were hanging out by my friend's pool and just relaxing. When all of a sudden we heard some music. We are all in our late teens, and the music was the kind of music we like, Drake, The Weeknd, and Frank Ocean, so we decided, being the dumbass teenagers we are, to drive around and look for it. As we went down certain roads, it would get louder and louder until we reached this sort of park, where it was like lots of woods and trails and some lodges and whatnot. When we pulled into the parking lot, the music changed from rap to a hymn that resembled Take Me Out to the Ball Game. It was overall extremely eerie and freaked us all out because the tune just randomly changed to something really ducking freaky. As we got deeper into the parking lot, the music just stopped overall, so we decided to leave. After we got a couple of miles out, the rap music picked back up again, and so we pulled into a driveway and turned around and headed back. Once we got back to the parking lot, it was the same exact story, eerie tune, music abruptly stopped. At this point we were all just super freaked out and decided to go back to our friend's house. The rap music kept going for about 30 minutes when we got back before stopping. I never heard it again when I was there and still don't know what it was. My mom tried to tell me it was probably some event/party there, but it just doesn't make any sense. Why'd the music switch? Let me know what you guys think. Something was in that damn basement. This incident occurred while I was living with my old boyfriend in Boston a few years ago. He lives in a very old house, right down the road from the Bunker Hill Memorial. So many people died in the area where this house was built. Just some history on the place, it will clear some things up a bit. When they moved in, his basement didn't originally have his bedroom. They had to knock down walls and dig out an extra room down there to make it. While doing this, his father found a skull in the dirt, along with an old liquor bottle in there, so that's creepy enough right there, just knowing that was there where his room is now. Also, his parents are both into Wicca, and his mother practiced a lot of those types of things. They told me that there were always weird things going on down there, always some kind of ghost activity. You'd feel like you were being watched down in the main part of the basement usually. Now at the time when I was staying there, his father was doing some remodeling in the basement, knocking down some walls to make space down there. They were getting rid of the boiler room walls. Whenever you would go in there, it would feel really strange. The air was always colder in there than the rest of the basement. One particular wall had a very eerie feeling about it. If you were to put your hands against it and close your eyes, you'd get a feeling similar to being in a cave or as if you were in a sort of void. The whole room just didn't seem right at all. The day they knocked down that one wall, some pretty crazy shit happened that night, almost as if whatever might have been connected to that wall was let out. I and my boyfriend were lying in bed with the lights out, except for the dim lights we had on for our pet lizards. I happened to look at the TV screen, and it seemed to flash a dim greenish color for a split second, kind of like the color you see when you click the TV off, I guess. A couple seconds after that happened, I could see a little black/purplish dot streaking across the room. My boyfriend saw it too and asked me if I had seen anything weird. After that happened, he kind of freaked out and ran upstairs and told his mother about what was going on, since we both saw whatever this thing was. When they both came back downstairs, they pretty much decided it would be best to at least do a cleansing ritual to try to cast whatever it was out if anything was there. They just used the sage and smudged the area. Can't really remember all of what they did, but that's basically what went on. Right after they were finished with the sage, I could hear this really weird noise coming from somewhere. It sounded like something was crying out, but it sounded far away, yet in the room at the same time. It was just really freaky the way it sounded, like it was all around, yet distant. It was also colder than usual down there while this happened, which is strange since it was always pretty warm, almost hot, down there. So after this, that was all that happened for the night, and we all went back to bed, since it was almost midnight at this point. Now in the basement, my boyfriend's parents have a whole recording studio set up down there. There's this little sound booth at the far end of the basement, and it has a little window in it that looks out into the main room down there. It's high up too, and in back of a bunch of drum sets, so there's no way you could reach it easily without tripping over shit. Here's why I'm describing all this. When we got up the next morning, I went out into the main room to get my lizard's crickets out of the sound room. They're noisy little duckers, and blah blah blah, yeah. They get stuck in there for the night. The window to the sound room? It had what looked like a ducking face print on it, and it definitely wasn't there the night before we went to bed. My boyfriend and I didn't put it there, and we're the only ones who were down there at night. It was really weird that this thing was there. It was like whatever spirit, or who the hell knows what, was cast out of there got smacked into the window on the way out. I managed to get a decent pic of it before we cleaned the glass off. I'll put that up. Just so you can make it out better, it looks like a face that you're seeing the profile of /sideways, and it also kinda looks like the mouth is hanging open. There are also streaks on each side of this face thing. My boyfriend thought they looked like marks of hands sliding down the glass. Look under the reflection of the orange light, the face, or whatever it is underneath that. Anyway, that's pretty much it. After this happened, things were pretty quiet down there for the most part. Does anyone else have an experience like this? When I was 15, I moved, and the house we moved into was nice. It was big enough for us all and felt like a good fit. During the showing of the house, the basement door had a lock on it, and we were unable to view it at the time. We were assured that it was nothing, and when we moved in, we had the lock cut, and to our disbelief, there was a letter and a pentagram painted in black on the wall. The letter stated that the previous tenant was involved in some sketchy activities like witchcraft, and she said she had gone too far and opened something she couldn't close. This led to our decision to relocate. Nobody had thought anything of it, as we all had no belief in anything like that, and I had suppressed those previous experiences as I rationalized them to just being an overly active imagination. Time went by, and we had painted the wall, but the pentagram kept seeping through every time we painted, so we left it alone. There were often times when we would hear things through the night, such as creaking, cabinets closing, and footsteps running through the house, but we were a big house, so we always rationalized it. At night I could hear a kid's giggle and footsteps running through the hallway. Cabinets started slamming often, and pictures would fall off of the wall spontaneously. It got so bad that we ended up calling a priest out and asked him to bless the house. We didn't mention the pentagram, and when he walked in, he walked straight down the stairs to it as if he was drawn to it. He blessed the house, and we didn't have anything bad happen for a while. I was around 16 at the time when everyone decided to take a weekend family getaway, but unfortunately I had to work that weekend, as my job only allowed me to work weekends due to school, so I had to stay home. I came home one day and had a cold, eerie feeling walking into the house, as I was a victim of a home invasion when I was younger, so since then I have always been extremely paranoid and on edge. We had several dogs, and we lived pretty secluded with neighbors close enough if something happened but far enough if we wanted privacy, so I wasn't quite as anxious as I would normally be, but that eerie feeling never left. I decided to call it a night, and my dog followed me to bed. I was lying there tossing and turning for probably 15 to 20 minutes when I noticed that one corner of my room looked extremely dark. The darkness was more intense than usual. The bedroom window normally cast a shadow in that corner, but this time it was pitch black, like I couldn't see through it. In the same moment that I noticed it, my dog peered her head up and faced the corner as well. She started growling, and I tried to shush her, assuming it was nothing, except she started growling louder and louder. The hair on her body stuck up, and she was snarling. It looked like she had an extreme case of rabies. I had never seen her like that. Growling, barking, and foaming at the mouth at the edge of my bed. I kept trying to calm her down when she lunged at the corner, barking as if she saw an intruder. I quickly turned the lights on, and the shadows in the room were filled with light, and she shortly calmed down. I convinced myself that it was nothing and tried to go back to sleep. I laid back down only to wake to the sound of her growling as she was before in the corner of the room. I decided to grab my pillow and head to my car to sleep. As I looked back to my bedroom window, it was completely black, and my stomach dropped from a feeling I couldn't explain. I never stayed in that house alone again. When my children were small, and I was married, I lived in a large older house. Several people, including my husband and my oldest son, had commented on seeing, smelling, and hearing things upstairs that seemed to be of a paranormal nature. Up until this point I had never experienced any of these things while upstairs or awake. I went through a period of time where I couldn't sleep. I had terrible insomnia. One night, everyone else was asleep in the downstairs bedrooms. I was sitting downstairs in the newer addition of the house, that was a den/playroom combo. I was quietly watching some television. One of my son's toy trains suddenly activated, emitting choo-choo train noises and flashing lights. This train was in the same room as me and startled me. I had been sitting there for hours, and it hadn't made a peep. It was turned off and silent. I wasn't anywhere near it to jostle it. When I went over to check and pick it up, the battery compartment was open and there were no batteries in it. I flipped the switch on the bottom of it to what I thought was off and promptly went to bed. I was a bit freaked out. Around the same period of time, one night I was sitting down in that den again with insomnia, probably at 3 in the morning, and I heard steps run across the length of the upstairs over my head. Now this is the area where multiple people, including visitors to the house who had never heard that there might possibly be something upstairs, had seen a young girl ghost. At the time the long room was my husband's office, and the other smaller room was a guest room. No one was upstairs at the time. Everyone else was sleeping in downstairs bedrooms. When I heard those steps run the length of the upstairs, the hair stood up on the back of my neck. I turned off the television and went right into bed with my husband. I know this is not as terrifying or paranormal as some of the other experiences people shared on here. This is the most terrifying or paranormal thing that has happened to me while awake after midnight. Now, while I am a believer in the supernatural, at that time, in that house, because I wasn't witnessing those things when I was there, I used to kind of treat it as a joke when people would tell me what they saw. There was no way that it could be a wild animal making those footsteps because they were human footsteps. The pace, the cadence, the weight. Everything. Like a little child running across the floor. I and a group of friends love to go on urban explorations, urbex, but I think I must have brought home some bad energy from one particular exploration. After this I was experiencing the most negative paranormal energy I've ever experienced. I and my boyfriend were just watching TV one night in my bedroom. All of a sudden I heard a loud knocking on my bedroom door. I tried to ignore it as I was quite freaked out, as no one else other than us was in the house at the time. My boyfriend didn't hear the first knocks, then the door knocked again but much louder this time, and he heard it. Having experienced paranormal activity my entire life, I shouted, "You can't come in." My boyfriend, who was a huge skeptic until this experience, thought I was crazy for shouting into the abyss, so he went and opened the bedroom door, so again I said, "You can't come in." He looked really pale and said there's no one there. We both sat down and just tried to pretend it didn't happen. That same night we'd made a tunnel for my cats out of cardboard boxes. Both of my cats were happily snoozing on my bed after playing in the tunnel. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, the entire boxes taped together to create this tunnel lifted about 8 inches into the air as if someone had kicked them with force. So I started to shout even louder, "Please leave, you can't be in here. Leave us alone." I got out sage and cleansed the house, but this made it even worse. Over the next few weeks I encountered so much activity, borderline poltergeist activity. I'd hear knocks, I'd hear someone walking around my bedroom when I'd be trying to sleep, and I'd hear scratches under my bed. It then got worse. Some nights my legs would literally be lifted from my bed like someone was trying to drag me out of bed, and I'd then wake up with bruises around my ankles. I've never been afraid of the paranormal, but this actually scared the shit out of me. I told my mom about what I'd experienced, and she called upon the angels to protect me. That same night the noises started again. I lay in my bed with my eyes closed just trying to block it out, when all of a sudden it felt as though someone was shining a torch in my face. Like behind my closed eyes I could see this bright light. When I'd open my eyes, it was gone. At this point, I believed I was experiencing some form of psychosis. Night after night this would happen until one night I tried to trick this light. Again I lay there with my eyes closed, but I had them open just ever so slightly so I could peek at whatever this light was. Again this light appeared in front of me, but this time I could actually see it, so I opened my eyes, and it was a bright, white ball of pure light, just literally floating in the air. I find it hard to explain what it looked like, but I didn't feel scared, it made me feel calm. I just felt confused as to what I was truly looking at, then it floated to the door in my bedroom and just hovered in the air. I've spoken to other spiritual people about this, and they all say it sounds like a biblically accurate angel or a very strong pure energy. My dad passed away when I was a child, so I wonder sometimes if it's his energy coming to protect me. My mum saw exactly the same thing in her bedroom on the same night I'd seen it, so I believe the angels truly did come to help, and whatever I'd brought home with me was very bad, evil energy. Has anyone else seen a light like this? I've never heard anyone else mention it. Unknown winged creature at night. Hello everyone. This is my first time sharing here. I don't have many experiences with the paranormal or anything similar. And I'm not looking forward to any of it. However, I had this quite odd sighting a few years back. I can't remember exactly when this happened. It's probably between 2010 to 2011. I've always been fascinated with sky gazing. In that year, there was a sky gazing event. It could have been a meteor shower, eclipse, supermoon, or something else entirely. It was an astronomical event. I can't remember what it was. So I stayed up late that night. I don't really have a porch, so when I walk out the front door, I go straight up to my house gate, where I usually do my sky gazing. I went outside sometime between 1 and 3 a.m. I looked up at the sky, and as usual, the sky gazing didn't turn out like I expected. I saw nothing. Maybe it was cloudy. As I drowned myself in the puddle of disappointment, I saw something else. A shadow. Near the utility pole, I saw a shadow. I thought it could be from an animal perching on the street light in front of it. But the size of it was rather unusual. It was too big for anything in my neighborhood. I tried to make a rational explanation of what kind of animal made a shadow that big. Of course I didn't dare to get out and look for it myself. In the midst of creeping myself out, all of a sudden, the shadow flew away. What even terrified me was the sound of it when it flew. It made a flapping sound louder than any flying animals I've ever heard in my neighborhood. What's even weirder is I only heard one big flap. I literally said, "What the duck is that?" before I sprinted back to the house. Until this day, I never knew what the duck that was. Never seen it again. Not that I want to. Saw a big ol' spooky darkness of definite shape hovering towards my friend and me at night. I was about 9 when my family moved to a more urban area, although for most towns this one is still pretty green, in the sense that there are lots of interspersed woods here and there. We had moved to a nice neighborhood, an apartment complex that sits sandwiched between 2 patches of woods, one on the south side and another on the north side. I imagine this neighborhood as a square, each side corresponding to a cardinal direction. The southern woods were much larger, and that was where I spent much of my time outside. Before we had moved there, The southern woods had also wrapped northward, covering the eastern border of my neighborhood. It had since been cut down in preparation for the construction of a new apartment complex, now full of college students. After living there for a year or so, I became friends with a boy in my grade, Cameron. He liked playing video games and generally hanging out at our respective homes. I was more partial to being outside, especially during the night. Even now, I like jogging in the woods at night. Guess I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie. Anyways, Cameron did not favor this as highly as me, although he did not dislike playing outside. I was the friend who was his outlet for that kind of entertainment. Again, being an adrenaline junkie, I liked being scared, but only when with someone. I liked sharing my fear with others, which I think is more common than people acknowledge. One night, a little after midnight, we quietly left his home. I navigate from his home as stealthily as possible. We're also wearing all black, my idea, and he follows suit. The adrenaline from sneaking out during the night makes us a little brave, so we head over to the east border of the neighborhood. Between the proto-construction zone and my neighborhood, there was a small, ignored patch of woods. As it made its way north, it thinned out into tall grasses and thorns. It was a really nice and cool night. The sun was shining kind of bright, as there were no clouds in the sky. We casually made our way to the area of tall grass, intending to venture deeper into the unvisited patch of woods. I remember my logic for stopping at a fallen dead tree to break a stick off. It was summer, and I needed something to wave in front of me as we navigated through the woods to knock down all the spider webs. While I was occupied with that, I think I either noticed that Cameron was too quiet or that he just made a frightened sound. Or he might have even said my name to get my attention. I honestly cannot remember. It's one of those less significant details in a vivid memory that are easily overshadowed and reconfabulated time and time again. In any case, I turned towards my friend because something wasn't right. Relative to me, his position was 10 o'clock, about 3 to 5 meters away. He stood upright, motionless, facing directly into the woods. I saw his arm first, outstretched in the same direction that he faced, his finger pointing at something in particular. His jaw dropped, and his mouth was wide open in shock at what he saw. I can't remember if the loud snapping sound I made while looking for a stick happened before or after I saw him. This might have been what caused him to turn away and sprint. However, if I recall correctly, he only began running after I saw what he saw. A few meters ahead of us was this dark emptiness slowly drifting towards us. It did not bob up and down as though it were taking steps. That is a detail I often want to reiterate when I tell this story. The next most important detail, to me, was how it grew in size. It was shorter than us to begin with. By the time I began running, it was much taller than the both of us, even taller than I am now at 6 feet. My mom suggested that perhaps it was a person standing up slowly. I tell her that this isn't right though, because it expanded as well. It grew in all directions. It had the shape of a rounded mound that was taller than it was wide. It just glided towards me as Cameron darted in the opposite direction. It didn't make a sound as I stared at it, none of the leaves under it crackled. There were no discernible details on it, just absolute darkness. I began running shortly after Cameron had, although now when I think back on it, it seems like I remember standing there for an eternity. Close behind Cameron, I am sprinting too. I trip once, and Cameron turns back as he is running and shouts something like "come on." I get up and do as he says. I did not feel all of the thorns piercing my skin as I ran away from the odd thing behind us. I did not look back. We commented on this immediately after making our way back to our neighborhood. Now clear of danger, we feign humor to help ourselves feel better. We also acknowledge how we just ran through a ton of thorns without even flinching. As the adrenaline faded, we'd start finding a bunch of thorns in our arms and legs later. I've told people this story so many times, it is the only remarkable scary story that I can remember. Every time I tell it, all I can think is how everyone probably guesses that it is made up to some extent, or completely. It frustrates me so much because I watched it happen, and I felt it happen. I was there, running, for my life, as it happened. Today, I still jog by that area. It is a fully built neighborhood now. I look down into the tall grasses and trees, and all I can do is remember that I have revisited the area a few times, always accompanied by friends. Even the day afterwards, Cameron and I came back. No prints in the mud besides our own. Summer 1996. Roughly midnight. I was 16. My girlfriend and I were in my basement bedroom, just lying there in the dark after fooling around, talking about trivial teenage crap. We had turned off the lights and closed the curtains. The brightest blue/white light I've ever seen formed in mid-air, about 5 feet off the floor. This thing seemed like it was tiny, about the size of an eraser on a pencil, but it lit up the room so brightly I had to squint. In the one, maybe 1.5 seconds it was there. It arced across the full length of the room in a gradual curve and made a crackling sound like cellophane paper being crinkled. Had I been alone, I'd have sworn I was hallucinating. My girlfriend and I both shouted variations of what the duck was that and ran out of the bedroom naked. We were so freaked out that we ran to my mom's bedroom, while still naked. Somehow in that moment nothing mattered, and woke her up with our frantic attempts to sputter what had happened. Naturally, she didn't believe us and was furious at us for other obvious reasons. That Christmas, we went to my uncle's house. He was a professor of physics at U of T. He was never the type to buy into paranormal hocus pocus. My mom told him my story, anticipating sharing a laugh with him at my expense. He looked incredibly curious and started asking me all sorts of questions I didn't understand at the time. He ended up telling us about some atomic theory that had never been witnessed but would mathematically result in a propelled point of light moving parabolically and would sound like crunching tinfoil, similar to the aurora borealis. So either I saw a ghost, I don't believe in paranormal existence, or I witnessed a natural phenomenon that had only ever been theorized. Late night interaction with a girl in a white dress. It happened 2 years ago. I just came back from my vacation trip outside the city. My bus dropped me at the station at approximately 1:30 a.m. I got into the main road and started looking for a cab to go home. There was no cab or any person on site. I was standing for 5 to 8 minutes looking at both sides of the road to find a cab. And on my left I saw a girl in a white sari, a traditional dress for women in my country, standing like 50 feet away from me under a lamppost. My heart immediately started pounding. I looked the other way and started praying. A few moments later, I heard her saying, "Hey sir, can you do me a favor?" I was shaking. I turned at her, and she was like 4 feet away from me. I immediately took 2 steps back. She smiled and said, "Are you afraid of me?" I said, "It's almost 2 a.m., and there's a girl in a white sari standing in front of me at a lone place like this." "Yes, I'm a bit afraid," she chuckled and said, "Don't be afraid. I'm the one afraid, actually. It's really late, and I'm alone here, and I need to go home. But I want someone to accompany me. Would you please come with me? My home is not far from here." Just to let everyone know, in my country it's not safe for any women to be out alone at night. I was scared shitless. But I didn't want to leave a young girl alone there. So I agreed to keep her company, but I asked her to maintain a distance from me. She chuckled and said, "Okay." I really didn't want to talk or make eye contact with her, so I didn't even ask her why she was alone there at this time of the night. I didn't know where we were going. I just followed her, walking beside her and keeping distance. She also didn't say a word the whole time, which was also really eerie to me. After walking for, 15 minutes, she stopped in front of a steel gate, which was on our right. She said with a happy face, "My home is a few steps from here. You don't need to take more trouble. I can take care from here. Thank you for helping me. You're a good person." Then she turned her back and started walking. I thought my job was done. I turned to the opposite direction and started walking. But out of curiosity, after taking a few steps, I turned my head to see where she was going. She was gone. There's no girl in sight. I turned back and came back in front of the gate and looked around. She was gone. I looked at the gate. It had a padlock on it. There's no way anyone could unlock it, get in, and lock it from the outside in 2 to 3 seconds. It's not possible. At least for humans. But I still didn't know what the gate was for. I looked up and saw a sign over the gate. It says X Cemetery. I realized everything that just happened with me. I started running. I saw a mosque on site and started running towards it. There's always a mosque near a cemetery in my country. I rushed into the mosque, which obviously was noisy. The imam/priest of the mosque woke up and came with a baton, thinking there was a thief. He saw me lying on the floor unconscious. After a few minutes I woke up. He asked me what happened, and I explained everything to him. He understood everything and told me the story of the girl. 7 years ago, a girl was ended. People found her body under the lamppost I was talking about earlier. Her face was messed up. No one identified her, no one came to claim her body. So no complaint was filed at the police. The rapist/rapists still roam free to this day. Since no one claimed her body, the locals buried her in the cemetery I said earlier. Since then, a lot of people, especially young guys, have had interactions with her. Some had hostile experiences, and some had peaceful experiences. I would like to think mine was peaceful. A possible paranormal experience occurred during a late-night walk. This happened in the summer of 2015. I went to visit my mom for a few days, and we always take her dog on walks at night, usually between midnight and 3 a.m. Small town, not dangerous, One night we were walking all the usual streets we take, and we were passing a house that's always given me the creeps. It's so tall and has a tiny balcony on the top floor that looks like somebody could just easily fall from it. I told my mom this, and she agreed it looks unsettling. We continue walking and pass several more houses when she says, "Now this is the house that's always given me the creeps," and for whatever reason I immediately looked up at the second floor and stared at the right side window on the front of the house. The two windows upstairs had white curtains and both only opened about 8 to 10 inches. I just kept staring at the window as we slowly walked by when I first thought my eyes were playing tricks on me because one of the curtains on that window started to move like it was being drawn back. It was moving so slowly it seemed intentional and unnecessarily creepy. I'd how to explain it. I quickly whispered to my mom and asked her if she's seeing the curtain move too, and with surprise in her voice, she whispered back, "Yes, I see it." It quickly became apparent that this was actually happening because I was able to see more and more of the completely pitch black room beyond the white curtains. The contrast made it all the more visible. It was pulled back so far that it was completely out of sight. We didn't do anything more, just continued to head home. I've thought about different possibilities that could explain it, but nothing I come up with really makes me feel like I can debunk it. Patty Pie and the Pointy Shoes. For years I never told anyone the story of the pointy shoes. I never shared the story with my parents, sisters, or friends. It was something that I kept completely to myself. It was, if you will, my own sinister little secret. It was an incident in my life that only lasted for 5 hours but seemed like an eternity. It happened to me when I was 7 years old, but I remember it like it was last night. My dad's brother, my Uncle James, had a small pig farm in southern Indiana. He was married to my Aunt Helen and had 3 kids, just like our family. However, where my parents had 2 daughters and me, James and Helen had 2 sons and 1 daughter. The boys, JJ and Max, were aged 10 and 11. Their sister, Patricia, was older than the rest of us. I believe she was 15 or 16 at the time of this story. She was an odd girl, to say the least. My sisters and I never quite trusted her for various reasons, but it was kind of a known thing within the family that Patricia was someone you had to keep an eye on. On the day of the pointy shoes incident, my dad and I were visiting the farm. My dad ended up leaving me there to spend the night for reasons I can't quite recall. I remember I didn't really want to, but I also didn't want to hurt my aunt's feelings, so I didn't speak up. Needless to say, that was the one and only time I would ever spend the night on the farm. When it came time for my dad to leave, he tousled my hair with his hand and told me he would be back to get me in the morning. I remember when I turned around to join the others, Patricia was looking at me with a strange, knowing look on her face. She knew I was uncomfortable being there, and I could tell it pleased her. There were still a few hours of daylight left when my dad's truck pulled out of the drive. I spent that time playing around the farm with my cousins. JJ and Max took me down to the chicken coop to show me how things worked on a farm. I have to admit, at age 7 I was pretty intrigued by it all. That is until Patricia spoke up from behind us. One thing I forgot to mention was that my cousin Patricia had this weird habit of making us younger kids call her Patty Pie when there were no grown-ups around. So Patty Pie surprises us from behind the chicken coop and tells us she wants to show us something. My cousins JJ and Max were good-hearted and fun kids to hang around, but even they seemed powerless around Patty Pie. Whatever she would suggest, we all would go along with it, even though her intentions never seemed kind. The farm had an old silo on the property. Looking back, the silo was old and decrepit, likely unused for a good 5 to 10 years. My cousin Patricia suggested that we play a game called Killers Are Coming. She instructed us to break off into pairs. One pair would hide, and the other pair would search while chanting the line "Killers are coming." Patty Pie told us she had learned it from some movie. She also volunteered to be my partner, and I remember feeling my stomach drop at that news. I didn't want to be around her without the boys. Of course I was too shy and scared to protest, so off I went with cousin Patricia to hide. I immediately knew where we were going. I could read the look in Patty Pie's eyes. She wanted to hide in the silo, and that's exactly where she led me. As the boys allowed us enough time to hide, Patty Pie guided me around the silo to its backside. There was a door on that side. Patty Pie said we should get in because it was by far the best hiding spot on the farm. She opened the door, and to this day I still remember the smell that came out from inside the silo. It smelled of damp, dark stuff. Like someplace that hadn't seen sunshine in a very long time. Patty Pie pushes me in so forcefully that I actually stumble over and land on my side. Then, instead of coming in the silo with me, she slams the door shut. The blackness was instant, and so was my fear. I remember immediately being angry at my father. Why would he leave me here? Couldn't he see that I didn't want to stay? I pictured my parents and sisters sitting around the dinner table smiling and laughing, and I was stuck in this smelly old silo. I was in here in the pitch dark with nothing. My mind began to imagine horrifying situations. I pictured an old farmer's hand flicking the switch on the grain elevator and the silo beginning to fill up until I was buried beneath. I pictured something dark and sinister lurking in the silo with me and ready to attack at any moment. I began to freak out and started yelling for someone to get me out. That's when I heard her laughter. She was right outside the door listening to me and laughing. I pictured Patty Pie standing there with a red smile spreading clear across her face like some gross wound. Suddenly it occurred to me that for as scared as I was stuck inside the dark silo, I was actually happy she wasn't in there with me. Eventually, after what seemed like hours but was probably only 10 minutes, I heard the boys' voices. They were coming to find us and were close. I heard movement, and with a loud creak, the silo door opened. The daylight was blinding at first to my eyes. Eventually they adjusted themselves, and Patty Pie was there. She just gave me a look of utter disgust, and then the boys were there. We walked back to the house and didn't play any more of that game. Patricia never mentioned the incident to me, and that was the end of it. It would not, however, be the last time Patty Pie was outside my door. I remember few details about that evening until the pointy shoes incident. I know we had dinner and played a few games of aggravation, a marble and dice board game. I recall Patricia did not play the board game. Then I remember going to bed. For reasons still unknown to me, I was put in the spare bedroom to sleep by myself. I thought it was strange that I couldn't sleep in the boys' room but decided it was best not to mention it. The farmhouse was old and had uneven wood floors. One could not find a square inch that didn't creak when stepped upon. When my Aunt Helen wished me a good night and turned off the lights, I immediately noticed there was a 2 to 3 inch gap between the door and floor. The light from the hallway bathroom would come through that gap and act as a nightlight. I was happy to have it. I drifted off to sleep. Something woke me from my sleep at around midnight. It was about 10 minutes of trying to go back to sleep when I heard the creak of Patty Pie's door. It could have been any door in the house, but I knew it was hers. I could hear each step, creak, toward my door. I was paralyzed with fear. I pulled the cover up tight around me and peeked at the door through my fingers. When the steps were right outside my door, I could see the shoes through the gap of the door. They were black and pointy. They arrived at the door and just stopped. I lay there clutching the blanket and staring at those feet. The shoes were off-putting. I could not move. I could only stare at the pointy shoes. Patty Pie was right outside that door, and she was probably showing that horrifying smile of hers, and she was going to do something really bad to me, and I couldn't even move. I could just lie there and wait. At some point I remember peeing myself. This game went on for what had to be at least 5 hours. I never once took my eyes off the shoes, and the door never opened. She just stood outside and listened to me breathing. Finally the first sign of sunrise came to the window, and eventually I fell asleep. When I woke up, the pointy shoes were gone. I didn't see Patricia the next day. My dad picked me up in the morning, and she had not yet come out of her room. I remember feeling quite fatigued during the journey home, having stayed awake all night observing that door and those unsettling pointy shoes. I fell asleep in the car and never spoke of the incident to my family. I never spent the night over at their house again. I told my dad I didn't want to, and he seemed to silently understand. I also never brought it up to Patricia in the remaining years of her life. She died in an automobile accident at the age of 25. They said she survived the initial crash but was consumed by the flames. When I learned of the manner of her death, my first thought was that Patty Pie had returned to the flames of hell, where she had first spawned. I did not attend her funeral. Seeing things? Earlier today, a memory unexpectedly came to mind, prompting me to share it and seek insight or similar stories from anyone who might have one. Here goes. I'm gonna say maybe 12 years ago, probably around 2007, I was over at my cousin's house spending the night. I was 12 at the time, and we were up late trying to find something fun to do around the house. Midnight came around, and we decided to play this game someone in my family somewhere along the line came up with years ago called What Was That Noise? What was that noise? It's basically hide and seek in the dark, but it's pitch black, and two people have to split up and feel their way around the house and look for the other people who are hiding anywhere in the house. The hiders will scuffle or move something slightly to make a noise, to which a seeker has to audibly say, "What was that noise?" and head towards the noise. The person then jumps out and scares the seeker, ending them and leaving the other seeker alone in the dark. The other seeker then has to do the same until they are ended and their turn is over. It's a silly game, but when you're young and alone in the dark, knowing someone will jump out at you is scary, and the hiders can mess with you for as long as they want. Anyway, We were all playing that, and two of my cousins, let's call them D and R, were seeking while I and my other cousin, let's call him J, were hiding. We both hid downstairs, where there was a living room and a hallway leading to 2 bedrooms and a laundry room. I went into 1 bedroom, and Jay went into the laundry room. I hid right inside the doorway of the bedroom and could see directly into the laundry room from where I was. The only light came from the green glow of the digital numbers on the washing machine, allowing me to barely see Jay climbing on top of it to hide just out of my view. We then both waited for my other cousins to come looking for us. About a minute went by of me staring into the green glow in the laundry room, and I looked down for a second and looked back up to see Jay standing there, his face and everything super clear, just staring straight ahead. He exited the laundry room, made his way through the green light, and headed down the hallway towards the living room. Confused, I got out of my hiding spot to go talk to him, and I walked into the living room, and he wasn't there. So I started to head up the stairs, thinking he went up there, only to be greeted by my other cousin D, who was looking for us in the game. I asked him where Jay went, and he said he had no idea what I was talking about, so I turned around to see Jay walking out of the laundry room asking what was going on. I told him how I had seen him exit the laundry room just before that, and he just looked at me with this puzzled look like I was crazy. He said he never left the laundry room and that he was hiding on the washer the entire time, and there's no possible way that he could have physically gotten back into the laundry room and on top of the washer without me hearing or seeing him if he had in fact walked out. So I'm not sure what happened, but it freaked us all out, and we obviously stopped playing What Was That Noise? That night. Does anyone have any similar experiences? I've heard a few similar experiences, but I have not received any explanations for them. Any insight would be greatly appreciated. It spoke to me in my husband's voice. I apologize for the length of this story, but if it scares anyone a fraction as much as it scared me, it will be a worthy read. When I was in my early 20s, I was married with 2 small children. The 4 of us, myself, my husband, my 2-year-old daughter, and our newborn son, were living in an old house that had been converted into apartments. I know that the house was built sometime in the 1920s or 30s, but despite my best efforts, I was never able to find out anything more about its history. We moved into the apartment unit on the left side of the ground floor, and we had a young male college student that lived above us. The apartment to the right of us was being renovated, so it was empty at the time. We didn't notice anything weird about the place right away. The first odd thing that I remember happening was that the toilet paper holder in the bathroom had a tendency to turn on its own, faster and faster, until the entire roll of toilet paper had unraveled and was lying in a pile on the bathroom floor. It only ever happened when one of the 2 of us was around to witness it. This was frustrating, but we didn't attribute it to anything paranormal at first. My husband explained it away as a defective toilet paper holder, but when we replaced it with a new one and it continued, he had run out of explanations. Around this same time, my husband and I would be awakened late at night by the sound of children laughing, shrieking, and stomping on the floor of the apartment above us. We thought this was strange, since the college student who lived there didn't have children. We eventually concluded that a girlfriend or relative of his must have moved in, along with her children. After a couple of weeks of being awakened by these brats at all hours of the night, my husband resolved to have a conversation with the neighbor about keeping the kids quiet, but when he knocked on his door the next afternoon, nobody answered. Ditto the next day. About a week later, when he finally did spot the neighbor outside getting his mail, my husband approached him. He explained the situation and politely asked if the guy could maybe put his kids to bed at a reasonable hour because they were keeping us up at night. The guy stares at him like he is crazy. He says he doesn't have any kids. My husband thinks he's just saying it isn't his problem, so he starts to get angry and tells the guy to tell his girlfriend or his sister or whoever is living in the apartment with him to keep their kids quiet then, whatever. The guy suddenly looks very alarmed. There's nobody living here but me, he says, and I haven't even been here for the last month. I just got out of jail for a probation violation. Well, that kind of freaked us out. It must have freaked the neighbor out worse, because he packed up and moved out a few days later. We stayed, and things got increasingly weirder. It seemed like whatever it was thrived on attention and was rather mischievous. Objects began disappearing and reappearing in odd places. This happened so often that eventually it didn't even freak me out anymore, it just annoyed me. When I lost my temper and yelled at whatever it was to give the thing back, it would take longer for it to show up again. I learned that the best way to deal with it was to simply ignore it when it happened, and the thing would eventually reappear, sometimes right where it had vanished. We came to accept that we shared our apartment with at least one entity, but it was childlike, and we did not perceive it as threatening. Over time, another entity started to make itself known. This one was not friendly, and it gave me a very bad feeling. The first time I encountered this being, I was lying on the bed that I shared with my husband with my back to the doorway. My husband and I had been arguing in the kitchen, and he had stormed out of the kitchen and through the back door. I assumed he was going for a drive to blow off steam, so I let him go and stormed off to the bedroom. I was lying on the bed, staring at the wall, when I heard the back door open. I heard footsteps in the kitchen, heading for our bedroom. I assumed it was my husband coming back to tell me sorry. The footsteps paused for a moment at the doorway of our bedroom, then I heard them shuffle across the carpeted floor of our bedroom and over to the bed. Someone sat on the bed next to me. I waited for my husband to speak, but he said nothing. I finally grew irritated with his silence and rolled over to see what his problem was. There was no one there. My husband returned almost an hour later. He had taken that drive after all. The second and last time I encountered this entity, I was, once again, in our bedroom. It was well past midnight, the children were asleep in their beds, and I was settling into mine. My husband wanted to stay up for a while and play video games, so he was in the living room. I had just turned off my bedside lamp and was lying there with my eyes closed, relishing the silence, when I heard footsteps in the kitchen. Once again, the footsteps stopped at the door of my bedroom, which was standing open. "Hey, Tara," I heard my husband whisper from the doorway. I did not open my eyes. I remember feeling annoyed because I had just been drifting off to sleep. "What?" I snapped. No answer. I opened my eyes. There was a tall, black shape standing in the doorway of my bedroom. It was not my husband. It was easily a foot taller, and I couldn't see its face. As soon as I laid eyes on it, the hair on my arm stood up. I knew this thing was bad news. I could feel it. "What do you want?" I managed to say. It didn't say anything. I couldn't see its eyes, but I could feel it looking at me. It appeared to be growing darker and more solid the longer I looked at it. That moment seemed to stretch out into forever. When I finally could stand it no longer, I shouted, "Go away!" and dove under the covers like a little kid. I don't know how long I huddled under the blankets, but I eventually felt the horrible knot in my stomach loosen, and I somehow knew that it was gone. I sat up, pushed the blankets off me, and looked around. The black shape was gone. I jumped out of bed, strode through the kitchen and into the living room, where my husband was busy playing an old NES game. He took one look at my face and wanted to know what was wrong. "Did you just stand in the doorway of our bedroom and whisper my name?" I demanded. "No," he said. "I've been in here the whole time." That was the last straw. I started looking for a new apartment the next day. We moved out a couple of weeks later. Later on, some friends of ours moved into the same apartment. They, too, heard the laughing children on the second floor but fortunately never encountered the shadowy entity. The thing that freaks me out the most about the whole thing is that it spoke to me in my husband's voice. It sounded so much like him, I didn't question that it was him until I opened my eyes. I sometimes wonder, if I hadn't opened my eyes, what would it have said to me? I don't like to think about that. I am scared of what my mom is going through at night. To provide some context, Mom has consistently exhibited heightened sensitivity towards paranormal events. For example, in childhood, she witnessed a man in black, which lurked in her family home's corners during times of strife between her parents. Later in life, she learned that each of her 5 siblings had seen the same entity doing that same thing. She has enjoyed many nights interacting with spirits and unusual energies. This includes animals. Sometime around 2016, we found a cat's skull buried in our backyard at the time. Once, when I was very ill, I actually felt our spirit cat crawl along the length of my side-lying body while in her bed. Wide awake, I looked over at my dad, who was watching football, half dozing and clueless, and the feeling immediately vanished. Every paw step met my body with a tingling sensation, and I've never experienced anything like it since. I don't think I really want to on nights like this where the paranoia is pretty brutal. The cat has followed us to our current house and is just one of many kinder spirits that interact with Mom on a regular basis. Mom has invited a spirit to connect with her and has felt its touch every night for years since living in our previous and pretty seemingly haunted house. Disconcerting, yes, I sometimes feel bad for my dad, who is just kind of lost most of his fear for it. The current issue is that spirit is no longer coming to her on the basis of polite invitation. It is just kind of there in the parents' bedroom every night, and one entity is proving problematic. It has been sitting on her head and her chest, and she can feel a heartbeat from it. The night before last, it started pulling her shirt up and down, which hasn't happened before, and on top of that, she was kept awake by orbs and wisps flying around the room. It touches and pushes on her a lot. I hear creaks and noises up there all the time, which, fair enough, could be anything. I think I'm pretty safe down in the basement, but goodness, I do get spooked some nights for no reason. What we've tried so far: saging, white sage, palo santo, some other kind of sage, I think, and incense, prayer. We had 2 Mormon family members come and bless Mom in the house, and I have a priest-blessed shawl that I have her use on hard nights. We are looking for outside help currently, someone who can hopefully bless the house again or something. I've asked her to set up a camera, to which she has responded, "I'm too scared of what I might see." Still, I think it's worth a shot if I can convince her. If this is all exactly what she says it is, I struggle to believe that all of this is somehow rationally explainable, especially with what my mom has seen and felt over her lifetime. Tips? Advice? Does fearing it and talking about it worsen activity? Anything is appreciated. Late night event that still freaks me out. Anyone have a clue on what happened? I've never really had many encounters with the paranormal besides seeing a shadow figure occasionally while growing up and still do, and constantly having lucid-ish dreams of my running through a forest, the same thing every time, but I don't know if that is paranormal. Anyway, this happened August 23rd. It was around 10 p.m., and I was home alone, my dad driving back from dropping my older brother back off at college, which was about an hour away. I was sitting on my couch, the recliner up, and I had my blanket over me because it was cold. My dog is a Chihuahua and Black Labrador mix, her name is Lulu. Lulu was under my blanket and lying between my legs like she normally does when I'm sitting in the living room. I was watching Criminal Minds, the episode 7 Seconds, and the part where Reed and Morgan were searching the girl's family's house. Lulu has separation anxiety. If I leave a room, she has to follow. She doesn't like me going to the bathroom without her. And sometimes, I'll actually shut my room door when she's still in there so she'll scratch and whine at the door. This is acceptable, but on this specific night, she was practically nestled in my lap. It's dark in the house because I like watching the TV in the dark, and my room door is closed. I heard what sounded like Lulu scratching and whining at my door from the end of the hallway. It sounded just like her, the way her nails would sound on my door, the way the door would shake, and even the high-pitched cues like she was being murdered. For a split second, I thought it was her, but then Lulu shot up from her spot on the couch and got out of the blanket. She climbed onto me a little and just started growling, and I got freaked out because the sound from my door was still happening. I moved my dog off me and got up. The sound stops when I stand at the end of the hallway, but I am still freaked out and turn the hallway light on. I grabbed the pocket knife from the table and opened my door. There was nothing inside, no marks on the door, and nothing unusual, which made me think I was going crazy. However, my dog, who had followed me, was still growling and seemed on edge, so I closed my room door and returned to watching Criminal Minds. My family doesn't believe me, and I still have no idea what that was. Don't go looking places you shouldn't. This is a true story, one of several creepy experiences I've enjoyed in my lifetime. It takes place during the summer of '09, July or August, I'm not sure which, and in my town's graveyard. Now I live in a town called Milton, Massachusetts. Milton is quite old, dating back to around 1640, and you may have heard of it. Money magazine ranked it as the number 2 town in the United States in 2011. It's a pretty nice place, all in all, but hell to grow up in as a kid, as there is absolutely nothing to do here. The oldest graves in our cemetery date back to before the town's incorporation into the town of Dorchester around 1640. It is a pleasant area, completely non-threatening unless you are faint-hearted, spanning approximately a dozen acres and featuring rolling hills along with a duck pond. I'm very used to it. As kids, my friends and I used to play manhunt there at night, and I did a research project on it during college. There are several famous people buried there, including Howard Johnson, of the restaurant fame, George Hollingworth, a semi-famous American painter, and numerous Freemasons, including a 32nd degree Mason. 33rd degree is as high as you can get. Anyway, on to the story. I was hanging out with my friend Chris one night drinking some mead he had homebrewed. We got bored of the usual video games/music/TV and decided to wander around town, which eventually led us to the cemetery. Now, we both possess a strong internal resilience when it comes to cemeteries. We can wander around any cemetery at night without feeling creeped out, though I think being familiar with our own helped. We ended up in the old section of the place, which runs along a well-lit and oft-used road. It was probably around midnight, give or take 30 minutes. There's a section that contains old crypts from the 1800s. They have granite frames set into the earth at a roughly 35 to 40 degree angle, with heavy steel doors welded shut to the stone by their hinges and their handles. I had done my research of the cemetery prior to this outing, so I shared with Chris that the reason for this was because the crypts were prone to flooding and they became a safety hazard. Being in a buzz state, Chris suggested we grab a blowtorch from his garage and hack our way into one to see what there was to see. We laughed, whimsically entertaining the idea. Wouldn't it be grand? Of course there were cars passing every so often, and the situation was already a little sketchy. I was certainly nervous. He really seemed to want to do it though, so to placate him I took a look at the various doors to see which ones would be most easily hacked into, on the premise that we would come back another time, though of course we wouldn't. Well, in looking at these, I came across something I hadn't noticed before during my various tours of the cemetery. At the corner of one of the crypt doors was a sizable chunk of rock that had come out, and by using your flashlight you could see into the interior. I took a look in, giving it a cursory view, but there really wasn't much to see. Crumbling stairs halfway covered with dirt and God knows what else opened up into the crypt proper, but you really couldn't see into it because of the angle of the stone. I judged there to be about 3 feet of space between the floor and the ceiling, lining up pretty well with the flooding story. It was all very gray, not terribly exciting. I called him over to have a look. He was excited, almost ecstatic, at the news. He took my flashlight and squatted on the ground and peered in. All the while cars were passing us by not 120 feet away, and I was glancing around, on alert, increasingly nervous that a cop would come by and make trouble for us, though it could be argued we were making trouble for ourselves. He's mumbling about how cool it is, but I wasn't really paying attention, but I know he mentioned something about the blowtorch again and possibly making thermite to get in. All of a sudden he stops dead and quickly drops onto his stomach to get a better vantage point into the cemetery. "Hey, Baron," I heard him say. His actual engagement of me brought my attention to what he was actually saying. "Yeah? I saw something down there." "You're full of shit. I looked before I called you, there wasn't anything except dirt." "No, really, I see something in the left-hand corner where the stairs empty into the chamber. Here, take a look." He hands me back the flashlight, and I hold the beam of light against my chest to douse it while giving another look around the street for cars. Then I drop down onto my stomach as he had, fix the light into the hole, and peer in. Sure enough, he wasn't lying. At the left-hand corner, right where he said it would be, was a gleaming white dome. A skull. I don't know how I missed it when I first peered into the crypt. I guess it was nerves, but I saw it now, clear as day. I let out an odd, excited murmur and tried to leverage the flashlight in my body so I could get a clearer look deeper into the crypt, hoping to see the rest of a skeleton. Hoping to see something to send those all-coveted shivers, which I love, down my spine. I got what I wanted, but it wasn't in the form of the skeleton. I saw something move from the very edge of my vision to beyond it, seeking refuge in the back of the crypt. I'm sure it was just an animal that burrowed its way back in there from underneath. That's what I tell myself at least, but I can tell you this in all honesty. It was pale, it moved awkwardly on 4 legs, it didn't appear to have fur, and it was the size of a mid-sized dog. My heart froze, and time with it, like the universe slammed on the brakes of the cosmic bus. This experience was way beyond my creepy comfort level. For a minute I panicked, then just like that, snap, time was back to normal. I sat up on my knees bolt upright, stood, and told him we had to go. He didn't want to, and I didn't care. I just walked away, and he was forced to follow me, asking me all the way back to his place what I had seen. I didn't tell him about it until we were well away from any woods and in the well-lit streets. He was silent, and in the end we both agreed not to even mention opening those doors again. I hopped in my car and went home soon after. As I lay in my bed, I got to thinking, no, I didn't think that whatever it was after me. I doubt it could stand the light of day, about the hole in the crypt. What had caused it? Granite is an extremely rugged stone, and logic tells me it was probably the work of water expanding into ice in a crack over centuries of New England weather. But what if that wasn't the whole of it? What if it was an air hole? What if that thing had been aiding the natural process by chipping away at it bit by bit? Some time has passed since then, and I still enjoy going on bike rides through the cemetery during the day, though I try to avoid that section of crypts, which isn't hard considering the nearest road is 60 feet away. And I absolutely avoid it at night, unless I'm with at least 5 other people. When I was born, my mom did not know she was having twins. When I was born with a twin sister, we were brought from the hospital to a haunted house. Growing up in this house and the postpartum circumstances of my mother seemed natural to me. I was a newborn, as was my twin. We knew nothing else. Our mother thought we were the devil's spawn. I might have 2 if I didn't know they were coming in pairs. My father would change our diapers, feed us throughout the day, get little sleep, and work the night shift. He'd come home on his lunch break at midnight to feed us and clean us and change our diapers. My mother would not come near us. I suspect in my later age she must have been having a mental breakdown that lasted for 18 years. She really was a good person to friends and family, just not us. On with the story. One night my sister and I were lying in bed getting ready for sleep. We were about 11 years old. We heard heavy horse hooves on the roof of the house. Whatever was making this noise wanted us to know it was there, and it meant business. We huddled together. We had in our room a child-sized little red rocking chair. Beside this rocking chair was a stack of notebook paper for school. That rocking chair started rocking back and forth in a soothing manner. Then one piece of paper rose into the air, and it was crumpled into a ball and thrown at us on the bed. We were as tight as we could be and watched this happening. Then the same thing happened again. All the while the chair was rocking back and forth. Another piece of paper rose, crumpled, thrown. A large, hairy creature with horns attempted to separate us, leaving my twin paralyzed with fear. I was energized with fear. I ran to my dad's door, courageously running through the long dark hallway, and banged with my fists on the door. My mom always kept their bedroom door locked. My dad came out like the Incredible Hulk to the rescue. He asked what was happening, and I told him what I could, which wasn't much. I had a speech impediment, so I led him back to the room running and hoping he'd follow. He asked Billy what happened, who told him even more. In the very short time that I'd left to get help, she told my dad. It had red eyes and horns with hair all over, and she was scared shitless. She wet the bed. And even though all this was happening, she still could not move. Paralyzed with fear. The girl across the street, true story. When I was a kid, my step-grandparents lived in a little town up in the Oregon mountains. Their house was at the end of a dead-end street, and there was a wooden guardrail painted white with orange stripes at the end of it. There were about 5 houses total on the street, with one house in particular that was noticeably older than the rest. It was directly across the street from my step-grandparents' house. Safe to say, this house gave everyone a weird heebie-jeebie feeling. My mom and my stepdad would drop me, my full-blooded sister, and my stepbrother off there from time to spend some time with my grandparents. I was about 5 years younger than my brother and sister. We loved our grandparents. They were always full of adventure and willing to take us to do fun things in nature. We would hike, grab berries to make pies, and have BBQs. Whenever we visited, there were always smiles and fun. One day, I, my sister, and my stepbrother were playing outside. It was closer to dark, probably about dawn, when we heard the gate of the yard close. This was a metal chain-link gate around the house. It was a girl. About our age, normal looking, glasses, kind of more on the tomboy side, a little older than all of us. She said hi and that her name was Raquel. She asked if she could play basketball with us. We had no idea anyone even lived in the house because we had never seen anyone go in or out, and this was about our 4th time going to our grandparents' house. I'm sure our grandparents knew but never had a reason to tell us because we didn't ask. Being the kids we were, we said yeah, and we all just started playing regularly. Just kids being kids. Nothing seemed odd about this girl for about a year, but one day, things just changed in her. I remember the first weird incident I, my sister, and my brother had seen. We were up pretty late playing video games on the Nintendo 64. Our grandparents had splurged on us and bought a lot of candy and told us to have fun. So we did. Until it was about 1 a.m., we were all getting sort of tired, so we were kind of just chilling and talking while the game was on the pause screen. The pause screen was black with yellow letters, so it was more on the dark side. We remained inside the house. We had heard the gate across the street rustling around, but the gate itself didn't sound like it opened. I picked my head up to look outside, but I was a little scared for some reason, so I didn't pick my head fully above the window sill. It was Raquel. I could slightly see her face as she was about to try and hop the fence again. She was in red plaid pajamas and a black hoodie and had a backpack on, but weirdly she wasn't wearing any shoes. It was raining prior to that day, so everything was wet. She had hopped the fence and had started walking to the dead-end wooden guardrail at the end of the street. At this point my sister and brother were both staring out the window as well. We were all a little bit freaked out because WTF? She had continued to walk towards the guardrail, hopped over it, and walked straight into the forest. We were so confused and scared as to why she would do this. We chalked it up to maybe she was going to drink? Or smoke? I mean, she was a little older than us, she was about 16. But it was 1 a.m., and I was in a town in the forest. Eventually, my brother and my sister fell asleep, but I didn't. I waited. I stayed up until about 3:30 a.m. to see if I would hear the rustle of the gate, but I never did. It seemed like she never came back that night. The next day, we all got up to go to the lake for a lake day. It was about 10:30 a.m., 11-ish, my grandparents gave me a bag to take to the trash before we left, and as I was taking out the trash, I looked across the street and saw Raquel sitting on a chair on the patio of her house. There was a full glass of what looked like a reddish liquid sitting in front of her. I waved, but she just had this disgusted look on her face, like I'm talking evil disgusted. She didn't say hi, and she didn't wave. Nothing. Her hood was up, and her shoulders were shrugged up to her neck. She was looking directly at me. Nothing. We had gone back home and had heard a story about Raquel from one of our other friends that swore he would never hang out with her again. My sister and this guy from Oregon, Cage, kinda had a crush on each other and would talk on the phone, which is why we even heard about this story. But it happened to him. He, a couple of friends, and Raquel were apparently hanging out in Raquel's parents' basement smoking cigs, being young teens. Well, two of the kids went upstairs to go do something apparently, and Raquel stayed with the Cage and was finishing the cigs. Raquel told Cage she was going to go get the others, went up the stairs, closed the basement door, and turned off the light on Cage. He freaked out screaming and was banging on the basement door because Raquel had apparently locked it on him. The other two came back, and Raquel opened it laughing, I guess. He told my sister he would never hang out over there again. Fast forward a couple months, we arrive in Oregon to visit again. Raquel had seemed normal, so being kids, we decided to hang out with her because she had made a clubhouse in the back of her house, so that was pretty much the best bribe to hang out, of course. So we did. Everything was going great. I stood up and told them I was going outside to go take a pee. As I went outside and started peeing, I saw Raquel come out. She closed the clubhouse door and shoved a stick in between the lock of the door, grabbed the extension plug, and unplugged it. I could hear my brother and sister saying, "Dude, what the duck? Let us out?" Raquel had this crazy, devilish look in her eyes and walked straight towards me. I was terrified. She walked up to me and told me, "If you open that clubhouse, I will hurt you." Immediately I ran around her and grabbed the stick and opened the clubhouse. I told both my sister and brother what she said. My sister grabbed Raquel by the shirt and threw her on the floor and yelled at her. Raquel had this really weird sinful grin on her face the whole time. Like a seriously weird, creepy grin, almost like she liked it. Immediately we told my grandparents, who then took things into their own hands and walked over to the house to confront the parents. During the conversation, the mom had said that Raquel would spend long nights in the basement but brushed it off as she was just being a teen. She had told my grandparents that she had been acting very strange the past couple of months, so they confiscated most of her things as punishment and found that she was playing with a Ouija board. She burst into tears in front of my grandparents. She said her daughter was not the same. Told my grandparents that they would find Raquel throwing up in the middle of the night from sleepwalking/eating to the point of projectile vomiting. My grandmother said, "Please keep that away from me and my family, I'm very sorry. We have to go." We left the porch of that house, and I swear I could see Raquel looking at us from the horizontal basement window. Except if I was just a kid, but it didn't look like her eyes. It looked like a cat's eyes. I remember the feeling I had when I saw that. The goosebumps I felt I can still feel to this day. My mom and stepdad had split up a couple years after this whole thing, so we fell away from that side of the family and never went to Oregon again. But one day, 15 years later, I told this story to my fiancé's family at a cabin, and randomly a number from Oregon called me. I truly did not want to answer it because I thought, oh shit, there's absolutely no way. But my finances, mom insisted, to make sure I wasn't pulling the best scary prank ever. I answered, and immediately a loud buzz started ringing. It happened for about 3 seconds before it stopped and the line cut. Safe to say, we were all ducking scared. I truly think Raquel was possessed. She would talk to this board in the basement, forest, and God knows where else. I often think about what happened to her family, and to that house. I'm haunted by the thought of going to Oregon to this day. I hope I never have to. Low-key terrifying experience. I was in the Marine Corps from 2008 to 2012. I served as an infantry Marine and was stationed in 29 Palms, California. In 2009, while training for my first deployment, we went to a specialty school called Marine Corps Cold Weather Mountain Warfare School, which was located in Bridgeport, California. Enjoyed the 5-ish hour bus ride up Highway 395 through the Sierra Nevada mountains. I took in the beautiful scenery as my mind wandered about what I was in for. Dreading climbing the 12,000 feet plus mountains that littered the landscape. Weeks of training went by, and I was relieved to hear that we were moving to a place called Hawthorne to do some live fire exercises. Which was about 30 miles away to the east, back into the desert. An old out-of-commission army base that was deemed uninhabitable in the 50s for various reasons. I was enthusiastic to escape the bitterly cold temps up on the mountain. Slept on the ride there. Upon waking, I looked out the window and was shocked at what I saw. Remnants of the old base scattered the landscape. The landscape was filled with half-destroyed buildings, guard towers, and other typical military structures. Behind that lay jagged lava rock mountains casting their shadows over the destroyed buildings. The place looked like a nuclear bomb had gone off nearby. Have you ever seen the old nuclear test videos from when it was first developed? They would stage a fake town to analyze what the blast would do? This place was like that, mixed with the game series Fallout and Chernobyl, if you've ever heard of that. As we drove in further, I noticed a bunch of mine shafts heading into the sides of the mountains. Now I staying curious as to where we would be staying at? I was relieved to hear their means, makeshift fob. Nothing fancy, Binkosine supper, an old green tent for the NCOs and upper-ranking battalion staff. Us boots would be sleeping under the stars in the dirt. At least we had a makeshift Hesco wall around us to make things feel like home. During chow that evening we were all sitting around bullshitting. I asked my sergeant, what are all the mine shafts in the hillside for? He said they were fallout storage facilities as well as a fallout shelter Cold War was built/designed creepy. Ild War era. Which made it super creepy, it's Lil Eve. The people just decided won everything, Vehicles were still there, everything, it was strange. Night arrives. It was fairly hot out even though it was night, as we were back down in the desert. I was having problems sleeping even though I was just in my skivvies on top of my sleeping bag. Some of the others were awake bullshitting, I could hear. I stared into the stars and mountains looming over me. It was a full moon that night with hardly any clouds as well. As I was scanning the mountaintops, which, if I had to guess, were 500 to 700 feet above me. Where we were sleeping made it seem I could almost reach out and touch the top. I saw something strange moving about at the peak. Figuring my eyes were playing tricks on me from extreme physical exhaustion and sleep deprivation, I disregarded it. Even later that night I awoke to go take a piss. As I'm utilizing the head, I look up to where I saw something earlier. To my surprise, the strange silhouetted figures were there scurrying about the ridge line. Now this has definitely caught my interest as my mind was wandering. Thankfully I had a lot of really cool shit lying in my pack back at the bivouac site. Once at my gear, I grabbed my trusty PVS 14 night vision monocular. I bring them to my eye and look back up. Nothing? That can't be right? Huh? I swear I saw something. I looked over to a buddy of mine that was awake and asked, "Hey, did you see that shit up there?" He looks at me and says, "WTF are you talking about, bro?" I said forget it. A few more hours go by through the night, and a loud crash comes from the closest mine shaft, which was located 100 feet or so from the fob. Literally half the platoon sat straight up from a dead sleep. One of the sergeants screams from nearby and says, "Hit the rack, it was just some rocks falling." Most of us understood what he was saying. The next morning we woke up and did what we had planned to do for that day. Later that afternoon we had some free time and were creeping around checking the nearby buildings out. 4 of us decided to go down into a building. It was half above ground and half below. The wide staircase led down to a larger cubicle-type area. Barely any light came through the small windows. I clicked on my weapon light and scanned the area. There were still papers and everything strewn about on top of the desks. We followed the hallway, which made a right turn. Mop suits and gas masks lined the hallway, hanging on hooks. We saw a sign above one of the doorways that said girls' locker room. We, being the typical 19-year-old Marines that we were, decided we had to check that out. I took point and entered the pitch-black room. I was looking through the lockers to try and find anything interesting. When all of a sudden the door behind us slammed shut. We all ran like hell out the other door. 2 doors, one on either side of the room with lockers lining the sides. That's my life story. Thanks for listening if you made it this far. A terrifying experience last night. I recently moved back into the upstairs of my grandparents' house with my fiancée. This house was built in 1945 by my papa's father. We live upstairs, while my grandparents stay downstairs. For context, 3 deaths have occurred here. My papa's father had a heart attack during breakfast at the kitchen table a long time ago. My uncle shot and ended himself outside behind the garage many years ago. And 5 years ago, my dad did the same in the small bedroom next to our room. Last night, I was lying in bed with my fiancé. He was fast asleep, and my cat was too, in her hammock a few feet away. I was lying on my side, facing my fiancé, with my back to the wall. There is a small space between my side of the bed and the wall. My shirt had ridden up a bit. While scrolling on my phone, I felt a cold finger run down the bare skin of my lower back. It briefly hooked into the elastic of my underwear and let go. I heard it snap. I looked behind me and saw nothing. It was about 4 a.m., and everyone was asleep. I thought it was weird, but I tried to brush it off. I turned onto my back, tucked myself under the covers, and shut my eyes. Not even a minute later, I felt shifting in the mattress. I opened my eyes to realize that our mattress and bed frame were rocking. I looked over again, and my fiancée was still knocked out and completely still. The cat was still asleep. I briefly thought it could be a small earthquake, but nothing else in the room was shaking. The TV's light revealed the physical rocking of the frame and the disturbance of the sheets. It felt like someone had a hold of either side of the bottom of the mattress and was just shaking it. The shaking was deliberate, not violent or quick. I could hear the boards under the mattress rhythmically shifting. I just shut my eyes again. I thought to myself, whatever you are, you don't scare me. I chanted this in my head while the rocking continued for several minutes. It would stop for a few seconds, only to begin again. I didn't wake up my fiancée, because if this was actually some kind of entity, I didn't want to draw attention to it or give it more power. After many minutes, it finally stopped completely. I shared my experience with my fiancé in the morning. He had no idea. I've definitely had paranormal experiences in this house before. When I was 11, I once felt a large calloused hand gently lay on my shoulder and disappear, which I believe to have been my great-grandpa. My dad's spirit could still be here too. However, neither of them would have touched me in the manner that the finger did as it traced down my back. It was cold, dragged against my skin, and went into my underwear. I felt like it wanted to violate and terrify me. I'm at a loss as to what this potential entity could be. With these things, I try every angle to debunk, but I have exhausted all rational explanations here. I've cleansed spaces and done protection spells in the past, so I guess it may be time to do that again. Haunting an old farmhouse. In 2006, I stayed overnight with a buddy at a second property his family had purchased. It was an old farm just on the outskirts of Florin Road/Watt Avenue in Sacramento, California. My buddy's family had not moved in, and he wanted to spend the night on the property to get a feel for it. The previous property owner's husband passed away, and she sold the home for cheap. What struck me as odd was that she left all of the furniture and tons of miscellaneous personal property behind, which we discovered later had belonged to her late husband. I told my friend to get rid of all that junk because in my culture, Laotian/Thai, we believed it was bad luck to hang on to a deceased person's property. The superstition was that the dead might come back and look for their property. On that particular night, I spent the night on the couch in the living room. My buddy was sleeping on the floor next to me. I could not fall asleep but heard my buddy snoring loudly, therefore, I knew he was in a deep sleep and did not witness the event soon to follow. As I was slowly drifting off to sleep, I heard the closet door located about a car length from my feet slowly open. I knew it opened because it made the creaking noise from when a door swings on a hinge. At that point, I became fully alert but kept my eyes closed. I could hear my heart beating out of my chest. I was lying on my back, and I faced the ceiling. I slightly opened my eyes and glanced towards the closet. It was a full moon, so the living room was well lit. That's when I saw it. A black shadow coming towards me from inside the open closet. It had the silhouette of a man and stood approximately 7 feet tall by 2 feet wide. It crept toward me, and I was so scared I just closed my eyes and froze in place. I felt paralyzed and was on the verge of shitting and pissing myself. I kept my eyes closed and remained still for what felt like 5 minutes. Then the second half, and most scary, of this paranormal bullshit began. The blanket I had draped over me slowly began pulling off my body. I could feel parts of my upper torso getting cold as the blanket pulled away from my skin, towards my feet. I felt each individual hair on my skin stand because it was so cold. As the blanket continued to pull away, drawing nearer to my feet, I repeatedly whispered my friend's name, Dennis, Dennis, wake up. Something is going on in here, phoo. Dennis eventually stopped snoring and said, what the duck, man? I'm trying to sleep, you jerk. After that, all the paranormal stuff stopped. I wrapped multiple blankets around me and slept in the prone position for the remainder of the night. I never had a scarier paranormal experience. I also have not been back to my buddy's farm since the incident. Sometimes weird things happen, and they just cannot be explained. That night still bothers me to this day. I think the event took place sometime shortly after midnight. I thought the couch I was sleeping on was my buddy's, but later discovered it was part of the property that was left behind from the previous homeowner. I believe her late husband returned from the afterlife to retrieve his couch. Answers in the cemetery. I've been staying at my dad's the past several days. I don't know how to tag it to make it easier for you to find, and his new home is very old. Technically, it's his new wife's home, but he moved in with her after the marriage. Anyways. The home is right next to a massive cemetery. Not to mention it's next to the historical part of the town with a monument explaining the city's founding in the 1820s, etc. All the homes on the street are old and in disrepair. The houses on either side of this one are abandoned and neglected. The neighborhood oozes oldness, but I'm drawn to it. I leave tomorrow, and I'm quite sad. I didn't expect to spend most of my time hunting down ghosts, but here I am. I am introverted, and it can be argued that I am antisocial as well. I prefer being at home in my safe space. As much as I enjoy visiting friends, new places, and other family members, it isn't home, and I'm always relieved to be back home again. Yet, I don't want to leave this house. The idea of returning home fills me with dread. I don't feel close to my dad anymore, and I don't care about his new wife. But this home pulls me. I absolutely love my little nook in the home, and I feel at peace here. You'd find the situation odd if you knew how out of character this is for me. I believe there is a presence in this home. This home is old and borders a massive cemetery. The guest room is never used, minus my visit, and has become mostly a storage room. On the first night, I felt judged. I'd even joked with a friend via text that I felt like I was failing some test. While I slept that night, I had horrendous nightmares, and whenever I woke up, someone would tell me to go back to sleep again. I remember feeling like the bed was surrounded but falling back into the nightmares before I'd turn over. This too is out of character for me. I have an autoimmune disorder that causes me to have insomnia, and normally I wake every hour or so needing to use the restroom. Not here. I remember thinking if I turned over, I'd see someone standing there. When I awoke the next morning, I was shocked to see no one there. The room was empty. It felt like someone was protecting me from the evil, as I was terrified all that night. I can describe in great detail the demons I saw, and I rarely recall my dreams. Before the first night, I couldn't read the vibe of the room. It was neutral at best. The next night, last night, the energy shifted. I felt welcome, like they decided to share the room with me. I recall never wanting to leave and questioning why I feel so drawn to a house I'm unfamiliar with. I knew someone was there, but I wasn't scared. Yet, one side of the room makes me feel apprehensive. I believe I have a gift, but I'm not trained in utilizing it. I can pretty accurately sense energy, but I've never physically seen a ghost. I've visited a few haunted places and told people what I sensed and felt, only to learn later I guessed correctly. I found myself drawn to a particular corner of the room on my first night, and I've continued to feel drawn to it ever since. As I was surveying the room last night, I felt incredibly uncomfortable on that side of the room. I could feel heat on my back, but this uneasiness didn't follow me to the other side of the room, etc. It was also in this spot that had I turned over that first night, I'd have seen someone. I decided to try talking to whoever it was. I asked them, via an EVP thing I have, if they are nice. They replied with almost, they said hey back when I said hello. I decided to read my book I was enjoying out loud. They responded to events occurring in the book. Yet, they wouldn't answer my questions about themselves. Yet, I feel like the dominant presence is female, but I've not physically seen anyone. I eventually decided to end the conversation when I could glean no useful information from them. As I was taking a shower, I thought I heard a singular knock on the bathroom door, not my dad or his wife. I locked the bedroom door, which you have to go through to get to the bathroom, and it was close to midnight, and we'd said our good nights hours earlier. When I got out of the shower, I saw drawn in the steam on the mirror the outline in great detail of the lady I've been visualizing. From her hat to her decorative collar piece, and no, I don't have any mental issues that would explain this. Hours later, the steam remained on the mirror, and the outline was still visible. It was weird. I fell asleep fairly easily last night, but the vivid dreams continued. In my dream, I was lying in the bed and facing the windows. The curtains were fluttering, and in the same spot where I had previously felt someone watching me, I spoke to an unknown presence. Conscious me would have lost her shit, however, in this other plane of existence, I was not. I can't recall everything I asked them, but I remember I wasn't scared. I recall asking them about their deaths, and they told me how they died. I joked about them not being dead long based on their cause of death. I told someone in a comment that they'd not revealed their physical appearance to me, which is true. I did see something. They were wearing a long trench-type coat, but describing it like that isn't fairly accurate. Their body wasn't really proportional to, well, typical people. Their eyes were red and seemed as if they hovered a little bit as I was peering up at them. They didn't hurt me, nor was I frightened. Yet, I can only imagine if I saw this right now I'd have a heart attack. When I woke up this morning, I got ready for the day and was packing my bag to spend some time in the cemetery when I stepped out of the bathroom and about passed out. For half a second, I saw someone squatting in the spot I keep getting drawn to. This sounds like I'm probably crazy, but this home is very old, and the new wife told me there were deaths on the property, but she has no information on them. Might research this myself. Also, both she and my dad claim to have insanely vivid dreams. They won't explain them to me. Also, they are both adamant ghosts are stupid. The afterlife? Stupid. Heaven and hell? Stupid. When we die, we're just gone. Gone. We're not anywhere. When I've shared my experiences, they laugh and say I'm dumb, etc. They're so close to it that I'm convinced Satan himself doing a rap dance in front of them wouldn't convince them. However, I didn't realize that I was experiencing vivid dreams similar to theirs until I shared mine with them. I don't always feel something in this room. Sometimes it feels normal. And I'll forget for a while. Maybe they've accepted me now. I'm pretty quiet and non-invasive. I just wish I knew who they are, etc., but they've not told me much. Thoughts? Something or someone in the woods. So this all took place just out of high school about 5 years ago, shortly after my then girlfriend, now fiancé Smiles and I started dating. We were still in the beginning phases of dating, where neither one of us really wanted to deal with the whole awkward hanging out at each other's parents' houses thing. So we would often go out and find things to do. So this particular night we decided to do some stargazing at the state park just out of town. I swing by to pick my girlfriend up from work around 11 p.m., and we head off a few miles up the road to the park. I pull into the empty parking lot by the lake, and we start walking towards the dock. It's a warm, clear August night filled with beaming stars. We get settled in on the edge of the dock. As we stare into the sky, we hear some rustling in the woods to our right. I shine my flashlight in that direction, thinking it may be a deer or small woodland critter. After scanning the area for a minute or so and not seeing anything, we go back to the night sky. No more than 10 minutes after hearing the rustling sound, a loud clearpunk sound followed by a huge splash pierced the night. It sounded like somebody threw a massive rock or object in the lake around the same area where we heard the rustling. My girlfriend and I look at each other, both confused and slightly concerned, and I reach for the flashlight once again. I click it on and shine it towards the sound. As soon as the beam of light hits the edge of the tree line by the bank of the lake, I see a fast movement of what looks to be a tall, bulky person slide behind a tree. It was like someone quickly tried to shield themselves from being seen. My girlfriend saw it too and let out a quick gasp. At this point all kinds of red flags are going off. Who would be out here messing with a couple of teens just after midnight during the week? There weren't any other cars in the parking lot? I look to my girlfriend and can tell she's visibly spooked. Both feeling uneasy, we decide over a couple whispers to leave. The whole way back to my truck, I felt like I was being watched or preyed on. Just as we make it to the edge of the parking lot, we hear whoever it was barreling off in the distance, deep into the woods in the opposite direction. We hop in the truck and make our way back towards my girlfriend's work so she can get her car. Not the scariest of stories, but it was definitely strange, and I'd be lying to say I wasn't a little spooked at the time. We both just kind of shrugged it off.